Chapter 295. Qin Feng said with some vexation, those brats just learned this and did not know how to control their strength. If they really died. Yili lowered her eyes and said softly, we don't lack time now. Let's change the method and take it slow. Change the method? Yili said, training the eagle. Training the eagle? Yili played with the white porcelain cup in her hand and said softly, light the prison cell until it is as bright as day. Don't use torture anymore. The people in the prison cell will take turns to watch them and change shifts every 2 hours. There is only one point. Don't let me see anyone sleeping until they are willing to speak the truth. Feng Xiao asked in confusion, it's just not sleeping. Is there any use? Yili smiled, young Master Feng San may have tried not sleeping for 1 or 2 days, but has he tried not sleeping for 4 or 5 days? With this method, even the proudest eagle can be tamed, let alone a human. Although Feng Xiao had his doubts towards Yili's words, Qin Feng did not hesitate to accept it completely. He immediately turned around and gave the order. Feng Xiao turned back to look at Yili and said, these few days, does Princess Consort have any thoughts towards these assassins? Yili turned back and Zhuo Jing handed over a file. Yili opened it and said, these few days, there are all kinds of people who have broken into the residence. There are people who have been hired to kill, people who have come to seek revenge and people who have come to loot a burning house. Loot a burning house? Who has the guts to loot a burning house in the Prince Ding mansion? Mo Hua, who rarely spoke, said with ridicule. Feng Xiao smiled, no one knows if it is really looting a burning house or not. But in these few days, so many lawless people have suddenly appeared in the capital. Are the people stationed in the capital and the capital's magistrate doing nothing? Chief Steward Mo said in a deep voice, the Ding Palace has been attacked repeatedly. Even if the Prince Ding mansion is huge and there are not many manors around, it is impossible for that person in the palace to not know. But after so many days, no one from the palace has come to ask. It's as if nothing has happened. Yili rubbed her forehead and smiled sweetly, that person in the palace probably wants to know how powerful the Prince Ding mansion is. Feng San, send the news out tomorrow. This consort has been frightened for days and is not feeling well. Frightened? Feng Xiao looked strangely at Yili's face. Whether it was Ding Princess Consort or those unlucky assassins that had been frightened these past few days was still debatable. Yili glanced at him, what? This consort can't be frightened? This consort is still a woman, and His Highness is not by my side. So what if the assassins are frightened when they come to our door? Feng Xiao rubbed his nose and said respectfully, no, Princess Consort is too frightened and her body is not in good condition. Yili snorted, very good, let them be happy for these few days. This consort is frightened and will not see anyone. That's all. Chief Steward Mo hesitated and asked, if the palace summons you, Yili smiled, you are seriously ill and cannot enter the palace. As for the imperial physicians and rewards sent by the palace, they could just accept them. Don't agree to anything else. This old servant understands. Chief Steward Mo nodded. After dismissing everyone, Yili left the study room alone and walked towards the bedroom. She raised her head and looked at the almost full moon and sighed worriedly. She turned her head towards a certain place in the darkness and asked, why are you following me? Mo Hua's stiff voice came from the darkness, the prince said that he will protect Princess Consort's safety. Yili smiled faintly and ignored him as she turned back to the room. After she was far away, Mo Hua walked out of the shadows and exposed himself to the moonlight. There was clear anger and defeat in his eyes. His ability to hide was not as good as Princess Consort. Princess Consort. In the study, Yili put down the chess piece in her hand and raised her head to look at Qin Feng at the door. What is it? Qin Feng said, the assassins confessed. Mo Hua's eyes lit up as he sat across from Yili. He also put down the chess piece and stared fixedly at Qin Feng. Qin Feng smiled and said, Princess Consort's method is effective. Yesterday at noon, some of the assassins couldn't take it. But the leader of the assassins only confessed now. Yi Li nodded in satisfaction. She put away the chess pieces and the board as she said, "Bring him over, and bring the confessions of these people as well." Qin Feng nodded and left. Not long later, a man with a haggard and exhausted face was escorted in by 2 guards on the left and right. Just by looking at the man's bloodshot eyes and his vigilant gaze as he stared at Yi Li, it could be seen that this person had reached his limit. After not eating, drinking, or sleeping for several days, this person was extremely weak both physically and mentally. Even if she let him out, he would immediately fall asleep outside the gates of the Ding King's Fu. Looking with a smile at the man who was forced to kneel on the ground, Yi Li said with a faint smile, "I haven't seen you for a few days. Are you well?" The man's bloodshot eyes looked like they were about to spit out fire as he stared fixedly at the green-clothed woman in front of him. Yi Li did not care at all. She played with the jade bracelet on her wrist and sighed softly, "You don't have to look at me like this. I had no choice but to use this method to deal with you. My prince is not here. You have so many people bullying a weak woman like me. It's not honorable, right?" The man's spirit was already dispirited. At this time, he was still able to raise his spirit to glare at Yi Li. It was enough to show that he was tough enough. Unfortunately, it had no effect on Yi Li. Very quickly, he gave up and asked in a hoarse voice, "What do you want?" Yi Li slowly withdrew her smile and said sternly, "Tell me who is the mastermind behind this." "I've already said it." Yi Li sneered. She casually threw the confession in her hand onto the table and said with a smile, "In terms of making false confessions, I'm afraid you can't be called an expert." Zhua Jing. And San nodded and said, "This subordinate understands. The interrogation and intelligence analysis lessons will be doubled." Yi Li nodded with satisfaction and glanced at the man on the ground. "You still don't want to say it? Then go back and rest. Don't worry, I won't take your life. Let him rest for an hour before starting the interrogation again." Hearing Yi Li's words, the man's face finally changed. Qin Feng frowned and said, "If we let him rest and start again, will it affect the results?" Yi Li smiled and said, "An hour. Don't worry. I believe that after a short rest, this one will be able to understand the wonders of this kind of interrogation." "No, I'll talk." The man's face was ashen. Yi Li said, "Very good. Who sent you? Don't tell me it's the one from the palace. Even though you've just confessed, it's not like your subordinates don't know anything. The leader of the 3rd-ranked assassin organization in the Jianghu, Night Kill?" The man's face changed. He looked weakly at Yi Li and hissed, "Wang Fei is truly resourceful." Yi Li smiled and took it as an answer to his flattery. She raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, "Answer." The man said, "I also don't know who the other person is. But from the appearance and accent, he seems to be from Xiling." Yi Li thought for a moment and asked, "Where else did he contact you?" Chapter 296. The man said, "Yi Sha is in the south, near Yongzhou. When the other party came to find us, Prince Ding had not yet left the capital, so we did not plan on taking this job. However, the other party vowed that Prince Ding would definitely leave the capital within a month. Therefore, they offered a large sum of money to invite us to infiltrate the capital. If Prince Ding had not left the capital, we would not make a move. 10 days ago, Prince Ding had indeed left the capital. We observed for another 10 days and found that the assassins did not know about Yi Sha. Therefore, we decided to make a move." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Very good. Where is your leader?" The man was startled and looked at Yi Li in astonishment. Yi Li faintly said, "You guys were able to observe for 10 days before taking action. This consort doesn't believe that the assassins from a few days ago didn't return. This consort doesn't believe that you guys didn't properly assess the strength of the Ding Palace. Knowing that it is impossible to do it, yet you still did it. That can only mean that you are not the true leader of Yi Sha, right?" Seeing the man lower his head and not speak, Yi Li did not mind. She grabbed a piece of paper from the table and wrote for a while before raising her head and handing it to Qin Feng. take him down and ask him according to what is written. If you still can't get anything out of him, then there is no need to bring him back. This consort does not have that much patience. Qin Feng glanced at the paper in his hand and waved his hand at the guard before taking him out. Mo Hua looked at Yi Li and said, Wang Fei already knew that he was not the true leader. Since that is the case, why waste time on him? Yi Li smiled helplessly and said, although he is only a scout, we really do not know where the rest of Yisha are, right? I feel that, if we can't find these people quickly, we will be in big trouble. Mo Hua gritted her teeth and said, even if that person in the palace is not involved, he definitely knows about these people's plan. The Shadow Guard has been obstructed in their search for the past few days, it is definitely that person's doing. Yi Li calmly said, has the Shadow Guard reached the point where they can be easily obstructed by the palace guards? Mo Hua's face was ashen, unable to say anything for a long time. After a long time, he gritted his teeth and said, I don't know what the princess consort has in mind. Yi Li shrugged and said with a smile, I don't have any great moves. I'm just going to deal with all changes by sticking to the status quo. Half an hour later, Qin Feng delivered the assassin's confession again. The expression on his face was even more austere than before. Yi Li was not in a hurry to look at the confession and asked, is he dead? Qin Feng shook his head and said, not dead, he fainted. Yi Li nodded and lowered her head to look at the confession in her hand. A cold smile gradually appeared on her lips, very good. She raised her hand and handed the confession to Mo Hua and Zhuo Jing. The two looked at it and their expressions became heavy. Mo Hua stood and said, this subordinate will immediately call all the Shadow Guard near the capital back to the Fu. Stop! Yi Li said calmly. Mo Hua turned around and glared at Yi Li with some anger, Princess, all the people have already joined forces to attack the Wang Fu. Once they come in, I will make sure they don't return. Yi Li said with a cold smile. Mo Hua stilled, as if frightened by Yi Li's unrestrained killing intent. She frowned and said, even though the Wang Fu is heavily guarded, it is impossible to guard against so many experts at the same time. It is not just princess's safety, but also many important places in the Fu. Yi Li's smile was warm, but it made the people who heard it feel a chill in their bones. Don't worry. Send someone to tell General Sun to lead the Black Cloud Cavalry to guard all the exits in and out of the capital. Once the assassins escape, kill them without mercy. The Shadow Guard will be stationed in all parts of the capital. Once they find someone escaping, kill them. Also, if the Shadow Guard near the Prince Ding mansion sees the situation in the Fu, immediately surround the king's mansion. No one can enter, no one can leave. This subordinate obeys, Qin Feng and Zhuo Jing said respectfully. Mo Hua looked at the two and also acknowledged. Yi Li nodded and said to Qin Feng, let out all of your people to train. Their first mission is codenamed Extermination. Qin Feng nodded excitedly and said, this subordinate understands. This subordinate will not disappoint Princess's trust. Yi Li waved her hand to dismiss the three of them. She raised her head to look at the bright sunlight outside the window and couldn't help but sigh. In a short span of 10 days, the king's mansion had turned into a sea of blood. But, no matter what, she had to protect this mansion. This was not only a grand king's mansion, but it was also her home. Ever since Prince Ding left the capital, the nobles in the capital could clearly feel the gloomy atmosphere of an impending storm. Not everyone was kept in the dark about the continuous attacks on the king's mansion. After all, the commotion caused by the killings was not small. But there was no indication from the palace, so people could somewhat understand the thoughts of that person in the palace. But occasionally, there would be a faint uneasiness in their hearts. It was good that nothing happened to the king's mansion. If something really happened, Prince Ding's return would be a very troublesome matter. A few days later, there was news that Princess Ding had been frightened and was bedridden. Even the summons from the palace were all rejected. The king's mansion closed its doors to visitors, so no matter if it was those who were worried or those who wanted to inquire about the news, there was no way to know the real news of the king's consort. Many people also secretly believed the rumor that Princess Ding was seriously ill. After all, she was a teenage girl. No matter how powerful she was, without Prince Ding by her side, even a normal man would not be able to withstand the continuous assassination attempts for 10 days, let alone a girl. Princess, Lord Su from the Imperial Censor's mansion requests an audience. Director Mo respectfully reported. The brush in Yi Li's hand paused and she faintly said, I won't see him. Please ask Lord Su to return. When my body recovers, I will go to the Imperial Censor's mansion to pay my respects to uncle and aunt another day. Director Mo hesitated for a moment and said, Lord Su is very insistent. He also said that if Princess insists on not seeing him, he will immediately enter the palace to meet the Emperor and recount the recent assassination attempts on the king's mansion. In reality, it wasn't that no one had reported this matter to the Emperor, but all the memorials had been kept by the Emperor and not sent out, completely treating it as if there was no such matter. Some of these people were hindered by the Emperor's intentions, some were secretly appeased by people from the Prince Ding mansion. So even though the assassination attempt on the Prince Ding mansion was an open secret, but on the surface, everyone still accompanied the Emperor and acted as if they did not know. Yi Li was silent for a moment and finally said, invite uncle in. Su Hongyan followed Director Mo in. Director Mo excused himself at the door and invited him to enter the study alone. Yi Li put down the brush and stood to greet, Uncle, why have you come? Su Hongyan glared at her in exasperation and said, if I didn't come, I would have left you in the Prince Ding mansion without knowing if you were alive or dead. Yi Li smiled and pulled Su Hongyan into the study to sit down, smiling as she said, what do you mean by alive or dead? Li is fine. I've made uncle and aunt worried these days. Su Hongyan faintly glanced at her, you know we're worried but you still stopped your second brother outside. If I personally came today, you wouldn't have sent any news to the family? Yi Li looked with some difficulty at Su Hongyan and said, Uncle, these days, my Fu. Su Hongyan frowned and said, these days, Jing has been very chaotic. The people in my Fu were sent by you. Yi Li nodded and said, I'm afraid that there will be chaos in the capital in the next few days. Uncle and aunt should be careful. Su Hongyan frowned and said, what does the Emperor mean? Chapter 297. Yi Li smiled helplessly as she said, what other meaning can there be? Using the prince's absence to use someone else's hand to destroy the Prince Ding mansion. Even if the prince comes back, it can't be blamed on the Emperor, right? At that time, the prince will either lower his head and swallow this loss. If the prince can't help but attack the Emperor, then the Ding mansion will be ungrateful. Lear will most likely become a femme fatale. How could Su Hongyan not know this? He was even more disappointed in the Emperor's actions. Looking at Yi Li, he asked in a soft voice, you can't always claim to be sick. What plans do you have? Yi Li lowered her eyes and gave a faint smile, catch them all in one fell swoop, so that no one in the world will dare to have designs on the Ding mansion. Su Hongyan looked with surprise at Yi Li. The niece in front of him seemed to be as gentle as before, but the coldness that flashed across her brows let people know that she wasn't as harmless as she appeared on the surface. Su Hongyan sighed and said, is it a problem for uncle to stay in your mansion for a few days? Yi Li frowned and said disapprovingly, Uncle, how can this be? Su Hongyan raised an eyebrow, everyone says that the niece is like a mother. Can uncle not enjoy the good fortune of a niece? Yi Li grimaced. In the past, when things were going smoothly, she couldn't even invite her uncle and aunt. She was afraid that they would bring trouble to her and the Prince Ding mansion and cause the Emperor to be wary. Right now, the mansion was in chaos. If her uncle came, he could only be in fear. How could he enjoy the good fortune? Uncle, in a few days, Lear will bring you and aunt into the mansion to enjoy the good fortune, isn't that fine? Su Hongyan looked faintly at her. He didn't object or agree. Yi Li helplessly rubbed her nose and lowered her head. She wasn't unfamiliar with her uncle's expression. It meant that it was useless to say anything. He had already made his decision. Yi Li could only take a step back and say, if that's the case, Lear will have people clean up the courtyard for uncle. Qin Feng and Mo Hua. Qin Feng and Mo Hua came in from outside. They looked at Su Hongyan and respectfully bowed. Greetings to Wang Fei, greetings to Su Darren. Yili waved her hand and said, there's no need for formalities. Jojo will be staying in the Fu for a few days. Mo Hua, make the arrangements. Mo Hua nodded. She understood that Wang Fei's meaning was for her to arrange for a shadow guard to secretly protect Su Hongyan. Qin Feng asked, Wang Fei, should we send more people to protect the Su family and the Yi family? Yi Li said, Mo Hua should send a few more shadow guards to protect Su Furen and Su Ergongzi. There's no need for the Yi residents. Who in the capital doesn't know that this consort has a cold relationship with her maternal family? If we send too many people, it will only put them in danger. I understand. This subordinate will do it immediately. Mo Hua nodded and turned to leave. Qin Feng looked at Su Hongyan and said, Wang Fei, Su Darren's courtyard is arranged in, Yi Li said, arrange it in the courtyard closest to the main courtyard. In addition, send someone to inform Feng San. Tell him to move faster. The sooner this matter is resolved, the better. Qin Feng's spirit was aroused. He smiled and said, I understand. I will immediately send someone to inform Feng San Gongzi. These days, they had been annoyed to death by wave after wave of assassins. Being able to resolve it all in one go naturally made his mood happy. Turning around to leave, Qin Feng's mood soared. Wang Fei had said the code name, Mia. Therefore, the assassins who dared to step into the Fu must not leave alive. Late at night, Ding Wang Fu was silent. In the study room, Yi Li sat under the lamp. She turned her head to look at Feng Xiao who was sitting not far away. Feng San, are you sure it's tonight? Feng Xiao leisurely waved his fan. His smile made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. The words that came out of his mouth made people tremble with fear. Wang Fei, don't worry. The capital is only so big. If they don't make a move tonight, they won't have another chance. Tonight, the enemy's blood will definitely dye the entire Prince Ding mansion red. Hee. This is a beautiful and mesmerizing color. The capital hasn't been so lively for many years. After so many days of strange happenings, if the Ding Wang Fu's shadow guards still couldn't find them, then the world would think that the Prince Ding mansion's shadow guards were all useless. Yi Li nodded, that's for the best. Then we'd better wait for their arrival. Mo Hua looked at the calm and indifferent Yi Li. Her gaze was complicated. She hesitated for a moment before saying, Wang Fei and Su Darren should go to a safe place to hide first. There is no lack of top experts among the people who came tonight. If an accident happens. Yi Li looked sideways at Su Hongyan, who was calmly drinking tea. She frowned with some worry. She understood her uncle's personality. If she didn't leave, he would definitely not leave. But it was impossible for her to leave now. Seeing her difficult expression, Su Hongyan put down the teacup and said, just do your own thing. I'll just sit here for a while and drink 2 cups of tea. Understanding her uncle's meaning, Yi Li nodded gently and smiled, since it's like this, Li will play 2 rounds with uncle. Su Hongyan nodded and looked at his niece's calm expression with satisfaction. Since she married into the Ding Wang Fu and became Princess Ding, then Yi Li's fate was tied together with Prince Ding's. It was also destined that she wouldn't be able to live a peaceful life. Since it was like this, whether it was Su Hongyan or the Su family, they all hoped that Yi Li would be as strong as possible. If she was like her mother, no matter how talented she was, it would be useless if she couldn't survive in this world. Until midnight, the prince's mansion was still silent. Yi Li and Su Hongyan had already played 3 rounds of chess. With 1 win and 1 loss, it looked like they were going to be tied. The two were locked in battle. Even Feng Xiao and Steward Mo, who were sitting at the side, couldn't help but go over to watch the game. Feng Xiao would occasionally open his mouth to give advice. Yi Li turned her head and smiled at him. Third young master Feng, a true gentleman doesn't speak when watching chess. Feng Zhiao rubbed his nose. This young master is helping you. Yi Li silently rolled her eyes. You're disturbing my train of thought. An extremely soft sound came from the distance. The chess piece in Yi Li's hand paused slightly. Feng Zhiao and the others' expressions also froze. Su Hongyan didn't hear anything, but he clearly detected the change in everyone's expressions. He smiled faintly and put down the chess piece, saying, "Let's stop here today." In this year, Li Er's chess skills have greatly improved. Yi Li smiled and put down a chess piece, saying, "No matter, it won't be too late to finish this game. Mo Hua, go out and take a look." Mo Hua nodded silently, turned and pushed open the door to go out. By the time they finished speaking, the sounds of fighting outside were gradually approaching. Yi Li waved her hand for Qing Luan to put away the chessboard. She stood and walked to the window, pushing it open to look outside. The yard was still shrouded in the faint moonlight, but many places outside the yard were lit with fire. Yi Li lowered her eyes and sighed slightly, saying, "Have them be careful, don't destroy the century-old Prince Ding mansion." Steward Mo respectfully said, "Wang Fei, don't worry. I've already instructed them." Yi Li nodded. She sat by the window, leaning against the window frame, and said with a smile, "That's good. Let's see what kind of people will come tonight. See, in this statue state, just how many people wanted to destroy the Prince Ding mansion." Chapter 298. The sounds of fighting outside the courtyard were getting closer and louder. Su Hongyan stood by the window, looking at the flames in the distant sky. He sighed. It seems that the emperor is really planning on watching with folded arms. Yi Li gently shook her head, softly replying, "Jojo, the emperor is not planning on watching with folded arms, but wants to fish in troubled waters." How many of these people do you think came from the palace? How big was Jing City? In the past 10 days, people from all sides had continuously provoked the Ding Wangfu. They had lost no less than 100 people. How many people could still be hiding in Jing City? If it wasn't for the fact that there were capable people behind them, how could so many experts sneak into Jing City so easily? If it was really so powerful, the emperors of the other countries wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Su Hongyan was startled. In the end, he could only give a long sigh. Why is the emperor doing this? When the first assassin crossed the wall of the main courtyard, Yi Li stood up again and walked outside. The Yahuan beside her quickly followed. Yi Li waved her hand, "Don't go out." Qing Luan said, "Usually, we can't help. Now that Wang Fei doesn't let us follow in the Fu, Nubi feels that we are useless. Qing Shuang and Qing Xia don't know martial arts, so stay in the room. Nubi and Qing, you should follow Wang Fei." Seeing her so insistent, Yi Li frowned slightly but didn't say anything else. She turned and walked out of the study. In the courtyard, Zhuo Jing and Feng Zhiao came to greet her. Seeing Yi Li come out, Feng Zhiao said, "There are a few groups of people heading towards the ancestral hall. They should be there to enshrine the embracing cloud sword. The others are heading towards the main courtyard, but there are a few who went to the library." Yi Li smiled faintly. "No matter why they came, if they all stay, don't think of leaving alive." "Yes." Feng Zhiao laughed loudly. He cupped his hands towards Yi Li and flew out of the courtyard. His red robe faintly carried a cold and bloody aura. Gradually, the sounds of fighting gathered outside the main courtyard. The guards of the Prince Ding mansion seemed to be unable to hold on any longer. Yi Li stood under the eaves. Although she couldn't see the situation outside, she could hear the sounds of fighting and smell the thick scent of blood carried by the night wind. Suddenly, a few black shadows broke through the walls of the courtyard and leaped in. They almost immediately saw Yi Li standing under the eaves, dressed in white. A few dark figures pounced towards Yi Li at the same time. Their lightning-fast momentum made it clear that they were not ordinary assassins, but real experts. Yi Li's literary style did not change, as if the murderous intent surging towards her did not exist at all. Just as the black shadow was about to reach her, Zhuo Jing, who was standing beside her, suddenly moved. He raised his hand and a cold light flew out from his sleeve and swept towards the person in front. At the same time, in the shadows, several sharp arrows shot out. The arrows were neatly arranged in a row and stabbed into the ground in the same direction. They drew a straight white line between the two sides as a warning to stop. The leader of the black-clothed men stood still and swept his eyes over the arrows on the ground. He raised his left arm and a long tear appeared on the sleeve of his left arm. The guards of the Ding King Fu, you truly live up to your reputation. The black-clothed man said in a deep voice. Yi Li pursed her lips and smiled slightly, you flatter me. The black-clothed man's sharp eyes narrowed slightly and a cold light appeared in his eyes, the Ding King's consort. Yi Li nodded and smiled faintly, that's right. How do I address you? The black-clothed man snorted, you don't need to know who I am. You just need to know that I am the person who came to take your life. Yi Li did not care about his threatening words. She raised her eyebrows and smiled, oh. Coincidentally, Ben Fei also wants to know how many people want to take Ben Fei's life. Since you have come, then stay here with me. She raised her hand and a red light whistled out with a sharp sound into the night sky. A giant red flower bloomed in the sky. The strange red color instantly covered the sky of the Ding King Fu, making the people who looked up suddenly have an ominous premonition. The black-clothed man was alert. He did not look at the night sky, but looked around vigilantly. There seemed to be something in the darkness. The black-clothed man wanted to listen carefully. But at this time, there was killing outside. Even if he had deep internal energy, he could not hear anything. On the wall, Feng Xiao's red clothes sent an assassin flying. He looked admiringly at the sky and smiled, Wang Fei, what kind of flower is this? It is very beautiful. Ben Gongzi will make a robe later and embroidered with this kind of flower. Yi Li's mouth couldn't help but twitch. She said faintly, this is the red spider lily, also known as the red spider lily. The only scenery on the road to the underworld is also known as the flower of death. Feng Xiao's body paused and he almost fell off the wall. He laughed dryly, Wang Fei really knows how to joke. Feng San, are you here to play? It was unknown when Imo Hua appeared on the wall. She looked down coldly at the people in the courtyard. Humph, daring to break into the main courtyard of the Ding King Fu. You are really tired of living. Zhang Qilan was dressed in a battle robe. He held a long spear and stood at the corner of the eaves. He was originally tall and sturdy. His entire life of military training had been refined into a baleful aura. At this time, standing on the eaves, he had the intention of sweeping through the 6 directions. The black-clothed man quickly found that he had been surrounded by the experts of the Ding King Fu. Under normal circumstances, he should immediately go forward and capture Princess Ding as a hostage to escape. But seeing the Ding King Fu leisurely standing under the eaves with only 2 women and 1 man, he suddenly hesitated. Was it really right to go forward? Could it be another trap? Princess Ding is so scheming. After enduring for so many days, it was actually just to lure us into a trap. The black-clothed man stared at Yi Li. Yi Li laughed crisply, it's nothing. Compared to all of you, my prince has not left the capital and all of you are busy scheming. The prince has just left and all of you have come to bully me, a weak woman. This consort feels that this is already kind enough. These days, all of you must have played enough. Now, why don't you take a look at my Ding King Fu's handiwork? Outside the wall, the guards of the Prince Ding mansion who were gradually unable to resist suddenly became more courageous. In the darkness, countless people once again joined in. The situation outside seemed to have turned around in the blink of an eye. No more assassins attempted to jump over the high wall and break into the main courtyard. More wanted to escape. But at the same time, the Ding King Fu's elite shadow guard appeared at the exit. Attacking from both sides, the Ding King Fu became even more lively. Understanding that they were trapped inside, the black-clothed men in the courtyard started to become anxious. A few did not think carefully and raised their weapons to charge in the direction of Yi Li. Zhuo Jing and Qing Wan, who were beside Yi Li, calmly went up to meet them. On the high wall, Feng Xiao frowned as he looked at the situation in the courtyard. He found that there was no need for him to intervene. He turned his head to observe the situation outside the courtyard. He saw a few figures quickly fly past, leaving a ground full of black-clothed corpses. He couldn't help but sigh in admiration. Wang Fei has good methods. If the Mahist army had such skills, would there be any need to worry about the world being unstable? Mo Hua stood beside him and followed his gaze. His expression changed slightly and he remained silent. Chapter 299. Yi Li silently watched as the black-clothed men died under the arrows. She raised her head to look at the remaining people. The leader of the black-clothed men chuckled and said, "Good, as expected of the Ding Kingdom, as expected of the Black Cloud Cavalry. However, does the princess think that we only have these preparations?" Yi Li slowly walked down from the roof and calmly looked at the black-clothed men. "No matter how much preparation you have, I don't plan on letting you leave alive today. You should be the true leader of the night assassins, right?" The black-clothed man was startled and quickly smiled. "It seems that my people have already told the princess everything." "Good method. Since that's the case, then let's see who's the real deal." After speaking, the black-clothed man suddenly flew up and pounced at Yi Li. During this time, he even dodged the 2 arrows that were shot from the shadows. Zhuo Jing frowned and raised his hand to signal for the arrows to stop. Yi Li calmly looked at the black-clothed man's ferocious momentum. She slightly moved her body to the side to avoid a knife. Her sleeves fluttered and a silver knife flew towards the black-clothed man's wrist. A trace of astonishment flashed through the black-clothed man's eyes. He turned the large knife in his hand and cut off Yi Li's attack. Yi Li lightly snorted and the dagger in her hand blocked the large knife. She then let go of the dagger and quickly used her other hand to stab at the black-clothed man's left ribs. Yi Li's dagger was originally made by an expert Mo Xiaoyao using cold iron essence according to her own drawing. Not only was the style strange, but it could also cut through iron like mud. The moment it collided with the large knife, sparks flew everywhere. It actually didn't fall and left a trace of a scar on the knife. The dagger itself was still in perfect condition and was still emitting cold light. The black-clothed man quickly dodged Yi Li's attack and the gaze he used to stare at Yi Li became even more dangerous. Originally, he didn't put this princess consort of Ding in his eyes because this Princess Ding's internal energy couldn't even be considered an expert. It could only be considered not bad. But in just a short exchange, Princess Ding, who didn't rely on her internal energy at all, almost made him suffer. If this woman had a high level of internal energy, the black-clothed man didn't dare to think that he would be her opponent. Yi Li did not intend to fight the other party head-on. She knew when to stop and quickly retreated to a safe distance. He looked at the black-clothed man indifferently and said with a smile, "The leader of the Night Killers is only a so-so. Take him down." "Yes." Zhuo Jing nodded and gestured into the darkness. In the darkness, a few figures quietly appeared in the courtyard and started to fight with the black-clothed men without saying a word. These people's martial arts were very similar to Yi Li's. Strictly speaking, they were far from being a match for the black-clothed men. However, they were very accurate and fast, which made people speechless. As long as a blade, palm, or circle hit the black-clothed man, it would definitely cause a lot of damage to him. However, they cooperated with each other very well. In addition, they had the secret help of a master archer. In less than a quarter of an hour, they took down all the assassins in the courtyard. Only 2 of them suffered light injuries. The leader of the Night Killers had his acupuncture points sealed and was tied up in a strange way with a rope. Yi Li walked over and said with a faint smile, "I heard that the true identity of the leader of the Night Killers is very mysterious. Even the Tianyi Pavilion, which is known to be the most well-informed in the world, doesn't know. It seems that this consort will be able to solve this mystery today." Zhuo Jing reached out and untied the mask on the black-clothed man's face, revealing a 40-something-year-old face with a determined expression. Yi Li calmly looked at the stranger in front of her. "Feng Xiao, who had been standing on the wall and watching them the entire time, actually fell down from the wall this time. He stared at the black-clothed man and cried out in alarm, "Mu Qingsong!" Feng Zhiao fell into the courtyard and frowned as he looked at the black-clothed man in front of him. Hearing this, Yi Li raised her eyebrows with interest and said with a faint smile, "Dechu State's #1 expert. Mu Qingsong. You're even willing to send out such a top expert. Your Highness really thinks highly of this consort." Mu Qingsong's expression was cold as he said faintly, "This one doesn't understand what princess means. The night killers are paid to do things. What does it matter if Your Highness or not?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows and looked at him with a faint smile in her eyes. She didn't know why, but Mu Qingsong seemed to be unable to withstand her gaze and turned his head away in a somewhat awkward manner. Yi Li tilted her head and sized him up a few times. She smiled faintly and said, "Dechu State's #1 expert. This consort seems to have exaggerated a bit, right? What right do you have to say that?" A trace of anger flashed through Mu Qingsong's eyes. He once again turned his gaze to Yi Li and glared at her. Princess Ding could insult his actions and even his character, but she absolutely could not insult his dignity as Dechu State's #1 expert. He swept his eyes over the people standing around him and sneered, "Just based on these juniors." Halfway through his words, he met Yi Li's mocking gaze and swallowed the rest of his words with an ugly expression. Regardless of how these people caught him, it was a fact that they caught Dechu State's #1 expert without any losses. Since ancient times, there was no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts. Even if you had the ability to reach the heavens, a loss was a loss. Yi Li nodded and said with a smile, "They were indeed lucky to have defeated you today, but you better believe me. Not to mention one Mu Qingsong, even if there were a few more Mu Qingkangs, this princess would still capture them." Mu Qingsong sneered, obviously not believing her. Yi Li did not get angry and continued, "This consort said that you are Dechu State's #1 expert was exaggerated. It is not because you lost to them. It is because you are already old." Mu Qingsong's heart skipped a beat. His face twisted and gradually became ashen. He was not yet 40 years old and was not considered old for someone who practiced martial arts. However, he was indeed old. Of the 4 great experts in the world, the oldest was Shilin Zhenim, Prince of Gojoseon. Although he lost an arm in a battle with Mo Lufang in the past, he had real power over Shilin and was famous for his fighting prowess. The second was Yanwang Chamber's master Ling Taihan. Although they were both Jianghu people, Yanwang Chamber's name shook Jianghu. Even the nobles of the 4 countries did not dare to lightly offend them. The youngest was Dechu State's Prince Ding Mo Shouyao. Although he was seriously injured and crippled in his youth, his name shook the world in his youth and he was known as the young god of war. As for him, he was a few years older than Ling Taihan. Although he had the title of Dechu State's #1 expert, he could only watch over a single night and slowly grow old. He could neither fight on the battlefield nor roam Jianghu freely. When people talked about the title of Dechu State's #1 expert, they would often sigh with regret. If not for Prince Ding's misfortune, Dechu State's #1 expert would have long been replaced. Yi Li looked at the defeated middle-aged man in front of him with some regret and secretly sighed in his heart. Mu Qingsong's ability and ambition should have been a formidable person. Unfortunately, he could only be controlled by others and was in a dilemma. The title of Dechu State's #1 expert was not so easy to hold. "Since I lost to you, you can kill me or cut me up as you wish," Mu Qingsong said coldly. His eyes were dim and there was a sense of discouragement. Yi Li waved his hand and said indifferently, "Take him away. Mr. Mu, Yi Li respects you as an expert. It's best if you don't act blindly without thinking and do stupid things like suicide or escape." Mu Qingsong snorted softly and allowed the guards beside him to take him away. Feng Zhiao finally came back to his senses. He patted the non-existent dust off his body and rubbed his forehead as he walked over. That person, how could that person be Mu Qingsong? Chapter 300. Yi Li smiled and said, "Why can't it be Mu Qingsong?" Feng Zhiao lamented, "He is Mu Qingsong, the #1 expert in Dechu State. He has a noble character and unquestionable integrity, and is unmoved by power. Back then, the emperor used the position of a general to recruit him as an official, but he refused because he had no interest in the bureaucracy and only focused on martial arts. It seems that he studied for so many years to study how to be an assassin. Although Yi Sha was indeed not bad, it was still far from the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce, which was also an assassin organization. Yi Li lowered her eyes, and her red lips slightly hooked up. When awake, he holds the power of the world, and when drunk, he lies on a beauty's knee. The pursuit of all men in the world is nothing more than this. Mu Qingsong doesn't love power or beauty. Do you think this is possible? He loves martial arts. How much better do you think his martial arts is compared to the other three experts? Yi Li asked with a sidelong glance. Feng Xiao rubbed his nose and remained silent. Mu Qingsong's martial arts were indeed very high, but as the number one expert in Dechu State, Feng Xiao clearly felt a little disappointed. This was because he wasn't much better than the other three experts, and was even somewhat lacking in some aspects. The other three were all busy people who were burdened with affairs. In comparison, Mu Qingsong seemed even more inferior to his reputation. How does Wang Fei plan to deal with Mu Qingsong? He is a member of the Mu family. What's wrong with the Mu family? Yi Li asked with a smile. Feng Xiao frowned and said, although we don't fear the Mu family, it's always troublesome to have one more enemy. The Mu family has always been neutral. If because of him. Yi Li shook her head and said, Feng San, Mu Qingsong's appearance here doesn't make you think of something? With Mu Qingsong's background, do you think he would really go against the Ding royal estate for money? Feng Xiao was startled, and his expression sank slightly. It wasn't that he couldn't think of it, but he didn't want to think about it. Although he was not a blood relative of the Ding royal estate, he had grown up with Mo Xiaoyao. He knew very well how much the Ding royal estate had sacrificed for the Dechu state. He had even contributed to this effort. Therefore, every time he saw those people who used to be on good terms with Ding country manor without any scruples, he felt not only disappointment and anger, but also endless coldness in his heart. Yi Li said indifferently, eating from the monarch is a matter of loyalty to the monarch. Feng Xiao shook his head and waved away the displeasure in his heart. He raised an eyebrow and smiled. What plans does Wang Fei have? Yi Li smiled and said, what plans could I have? If the Mu family could afford it, they would return Mu Qingsong to them, so as to avoid hurting the harmony between the two families. If you can't afford it, then there's no need for me to leave a powerful enemy alive in this world, right? When the sounds of fighting outside completely disappeared, it was already close to 5:00 in the morning. In the distant horizon, there was already a faint trace of light. Yi Li led people out of the main courtyard. The thick smell of blood spread in the air. Standing in front of the full moon gate outside the main courtyard, blood flowed like a river and corpses were everywhere. Qing Luan and Qing Yu, who were following behind Yi Li, couldn't help but rush to the side and vomit when they saw the scene in front of them. Yi Li closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was only a cold light flowing in her eyes. Greetings Wang Fei. Everywhere in the courtyard, people holding swords and sabers looked at the white-clothed woman standing at the gate and greeted her respectfully. Yi Li looked solemn and nodded slightly, thank you for your hard work tonight. Zhang Qilan was bathed in blood and sternly said, protecting the Ding royal estate is the responsibility and glory of our Mahist army. Wang Fei's words are too serious. Reporting to Wang Fei, the emperor is here. The steward outside hurried in. Although he was in a hurry, he still didn't lose his composure. Yi Li was a little surprised. She raised an eyebrow and said, the emperor is here. The steward nodded and said, yes, the emperor is already 2 li away. Should we go out to welcome him? Yi Li smiled and said, since the emperor left the palace so late at night to come to the Ding royal estate, how can we, as officials, not go out to welcome him? Director Mo, first bring people out to welcome the emperor. Director Mo respectfully acknowledged and waved his hand to bring people out. Yi Li looked at the people in the courtyard and pursed her lips with a smile, everyone, go out to welcome the emperor. Outside the magnificent Ding royal estate, the corpses on the wide street had already been quickly moved away. However, the street that was dyed red with blood wasn't so easily cleaned up. The dark red blood stains appeared even more eerie and cold under the light of the lamps. The dragon carriage slowly approached under the protection of a large group of imperial guards. The eunuch outside lifted the carriage curtain and Imo Jingqi walked out with his head lowered. When he bent down and saw the dark red blood on the ground, his expression couldn't help but change. He frowned at Director Imo, who was respectfully welcoming him, and asked, "Where is the Ding royal consort?" Director Imo said in a low voice, "Her royal consort has suffered a shock and is disheveled. Please forgive her for coming late." Imo Jingqi was startled and immediately smiled. "It's good that she's safe and sound. Prince Ding isn't in the capital. If anything happens to her, we won't be able to answer to Prince Ding." Seeing Imo Jingqi being helped down from the dragon carriage by the eunuch, Director Imo took a step back and lowered his head, saying, "Thank you for your concern, Your Majesty. Please come in." Naturally, Imo Jingqi wasn't the only one who came along. Following behind the dragon carriage were the officials and nobles of the capital. At this moment, no matter what they were thinking, they all revealed a worried and relieved expression on their faces. Director Imo only saw a pair of old eyes that had seen the world and didn't have the slightest bit of warmth. Imo Jingqi turned back and said to the officials, "Since that's the case, everyone, follow us in to visit her." Zhang Qilan stepped forward and frowned, saying, "Your Majesty, Prince isn't in the capital right now. Isn't it inappropriate for so many officials to enter the Ding royal estate together?" Imo Jingqi's eyes flashed slightly. He stared at Zhang Qilan, asking, "General Zhang, we remember that you control tens of thousands of soldiers near the capital. Why are you here?" Zhang Qilan didn't evade, saying seriously, "Before Prince left, he entrusted me with the safety of the Ding royal estate. Recently, the Ding royal estate hasn't been peaceful, so I led people back to the capital to guard the Ding royal estate. This matter. I've sent a memorial to Your Majesty, but I haven't received Your Majesty's decree. However, the safety of the Ding royal estate is as important as Mount Tai, so I can only return to the capital to ask Your Majesty for punishment." Imo Jingqi only felt a mouthful of blood in his heart. Zhang Qilan's memorial was probably sent along with the other memorials about the Ding royal estate being assassinated. He was too lazy to even look at such memorials and directly threw them to the side. However, right now, he couldn't deny and punish Zhang Qilan in front of everyone because Zhang Qilan had sent a memorial to him. If he didn't agree, it would be premeditated to the death of the Ding royal estate. Even though these were his true thoughts, he couldn't let others know. Forcing a smile, Imo Jingqi said, "General Zhang's words are too serious. General Zhang wholeheartedly serves the country and is a role model for our Dechu state's generals. Today, you've done well in protecting the Ding royal estate. We'll reward you handsomely in the future." Before Zhang Qilan could express his gratitude, an elegant female voice sounded from inside. "Your Majesty is wise. Yili will thank Your Majesty on behalf of General Zhang. Your Majesty is wise. Yili will thank Your Majesty on behalf of General Zhang." Chapter 301. From the main entrance, Yili walked out, still dressed in white. Standing on the steps outside, she glanced down at the nobles and Imo Jingqi, whose expression was slightly heavy. She slowly walked to Imo Jingqi and bowed slightly. "Ding King's consort Yili welcomes Your Majesty." Imo Jingqi was startled. His gaze was complicated as he looked at the kneeling woman in white. However, he did not reveal any hesitation on his face. With a gratified smile, he said, "It's great that Ding King's consort is safe and sound. This way, we can answer to Prince Ding." Was the consort frightened? Yili pursed her lips and smiled faintly. It was indeed a little frightening. However, the guards of the king's mansion were personally arranged by Prince. Yili believes that as long as they are still breathing, they will not let anyone harm Yili. Consort is right. This subordinate swears to protect consort with our lives. Standing by the side, Chief Steward Imo said in a low voice. swears to protect consort with our lives. The guards outside the main entrance said in unison. Mo Jingqi's expression darkened slightly. He forced a stiff smile and said, "Everyone in the Prince Ding mansion is loyal and righteous. Consort and Prince Ding are really fortunate. Pass on our decree. Tonight, all the guards of the king's mansion will be rewarded with 10 taels of gold." Yi Li smiled. "Many thanks for your majesty's grace. Please come in, your majesty." Mo Jingqi was about to step in when he saw the faint traces of blood seeping out from the main entrance. The morning breeze blew slightly. The smell of blood from the main entrance was even stronger than outside. Just by imagining, one could imagine how intense the killing in the Prince Ding mansion was. Mo Jingqi's expression stiffened. He smiled and said, "Now that Prince Ding is not in the mansion, we will not enter. Consort was frightened today and should rest well. Later, we will have the Empress send a few imperial physicians to treat consort. We will return to the palace first. The morning court will begin soon." Yi Li nodded, respectfully saying, "Since that is the case, Yi Li respectfully sends your majesty off." Mo Jingqi waved his hand and turned to return to the dragon carriage. Not long after, the dragon carriage headed towards the imperial palace under the escort of the palace guards and nobles. Yi Li stood outside the gate until Long Yang disappeared at the corner of the street. Chief Steward Mo came forward and said, "Wang Fei." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Let's go home." Turning around to return to the Fu, Yi Li slowly walked through the blood-soaked corridors of the garden. She coldly looked at the corpses being carried away or still lying in the courtyard. In the end, she walked back to the study. Su Hongyan was still sitting in the study drinking tea, just like when Yi Li had left. However, there was an additional volume of poetry in his hand that he had read halfway. When he heard Yi Li come in, he put down the book in his hand, looked at her and asked, "Are you okay?" Yi Li smiled and said apologetically, "I've made uncle worry." Su Hongyan shook his head and said, "Right now, our family can't help you much. Are there any casualties in the Fu?" Yi Li sighed softly and said, "Deaths and injuries are unavoidable. Everything is fine. Li will handle it properly. Uncle, don't worry." Su Hongyan said softly, "Uncle only found out tonight that Li is much more reliable than your second brother. You can deal with these matters as you see fit. Uncle won't say too much. If there is anything our family can help with, just send someone to the Imperial Censor Manor to inform us." Yi Li nodded and said softly, "Li understands. I've made uncle worry." Wang Fei. Not long after, Feng Xiao and the rest finished handling the matters outside and came in to report. Yi Li nodded and invited everyone to sit down. She asked softly, "How are things going?" Feng Xiao smiled in high spirits and said, "Wang Fei, don't worry. We've already caught all the enemies in one fell swoop. Although General Sun hasn't returned yet, is Wang Fei still worried about the Black Cloud Cavalry's strength?" Yi Li smiled and said, "I believe in General Sun and the Black Cloud Cavalry's ability. Everyone, tell me about your own situation." Zhang Qilan said in a clear voice, reporting to Princess Consort, "All the assassins outside Prince Ding's Fu have been taken down. Those who resist stubbornly will be killed." A mighty military general, even if it was a simple report, it was filled with killing intent. Reporting to Wang Fei, all the suspicious people in the capital have fallen into the hands of the Shadow Guard. 36 people who resisted were executed. Mo Hua reported in a deep voice. Qin Feng stood with his hands by his side and said indifferently, "All the assassins who entered the Prince Ding mansion were killed without mercy." Mo Hua raised his head and looked at Qin Feng without saying anything. Feng Xiao waved his folding fan and said with a smile, "It seems like we've caught all those bastards tonight. We'll be busy these 2 days. Qin Feng, don't fight with me." Qin Feng didn't even lift his eyelids and said indifferently, "This subordinate will naturally listen to Wang Fei's orders." Feng Xiao curled his lips and looked at Yi Li eagerly. Yi Li smiled and said, "If Feng San is interested, you can follow Qin Feng to take a look. You can also give them some advice." After all, they have too little experience in this area. Feng Zhiao's eyes lit up and he cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Thank you, Wang Fei." Subordinate Sun Yan requests to see Wang Fei. Sun Yan's deep voice came from outside the door. Yi Li said with a smile, "General Sun, please come in. We'll be waiting for you." Sun Yan pushed open the door and came in. He looked at everyone present and cupped his hands to Yi Li, saying, "Wang Fei has great foresight." This subordinate sent people to guard all the important roads leaving the capital. At 5:00 in the morning, we encountered many suspicious people who escaped from the capital. We killed 26 people on the spot and captured 7 alive. Wang Fei, please give your orders. Yi Li rubbed her forehead and said, "We captured so many people. Our Prince Ding mansion definitely won't be able to lock them up. Qin Feng, Zhuo Jing, you should choose early. If there's no use, send them to the Supreme Court." Qin Feng and Zhuo Jing both nodded and turned to leave. Feng Zhiao looked at everyone and asked with a smile, "Wang Fei, what do you plan to do with Mu Qingcang?" Other than Mo Hua, who was on the battlefield, Zhang Qilan and Sun Yan were stunned. Mu Qingcang. Although they were in the military, they had heard of Mu Qingcang's reputation as the #1 expert in Dechu State. They didn't expect Mu Qingcang to fall into Wang Fei's hands. Su Hongyan frowned and asked, "Mu Qingcang is the illegitimate son of Marquis Muyang's Fu?" Director Mo said with a smile, "That's right." Although not many people know of Mu Qingcang's family background, there are still a few families in the capital that know. He is Marquis Muyang's eldest son and the eldest brother of Marquis Muyang's heir, Mu Yang. Zhang Qilan and Sun Yan were stunned again. They only knew of Mu Qingcang's reputation as the #1 expert, but didn't know he had such a background. However, Marquis Muyang only had Mu Yang, his only son, when he was in his 30s. If he had a son as old as Mu Qingcang, it was still acceptable. However, the secrets of the noble families were not known to outsiders. Su Hongyan was silent for a long time. In the end, he sighed deeply and stood up, saying, "Li, you can decide on these matters yourself. This old man is a bit tired and will return to my room to rest for a while." Yi Li nodded and hurriedly had someone send Su Hongyan back to his room. Seeing Su Hongyan leave, Feng Zhiao asked in confusion, "What does Su Darren mean?" Yi Li said lightly, "Nothing. Uncle is just disappointed in some people and some matters." With second uncle's nimble mind, how could he not guess who was behind Mu Qingcang? Chapter 302. Feng Zhiao didn't care and said with a smile, "Actually, I'm not interested in how Wang Fei will deal with Mu Qingcang. This subordinate is more interested in who the people who captured Mu Qingcang are." When these words were said, all the gazes in the study fell on Yi Li. Yi Li lowered her head to take a sip of tea. Looking at the gradually brightening sky outside, she smiled faintly and said, "Naturally, they are people from the Prince Ding mansion. As to who they are, I can't tell you right now, but I believe that the prince will personally tell you soon." Zhang Qilan said with some excitement, "The prince also knows about these people?" Yi Li raised an eyebrow in surprise and said with a smile, "The prince is the master of the Ding King mansion. What does the prince not know about the people under the Ding King mansion?" Zhang Qilan clearly sensed his rudeness and said with a bright smile, "Wang Fei, please forgive this subordinate. This subordinate's meaning is, since the prince also knows about this troop. Then in the future, can this subordinate ask the prince to transfer a troop like this to the Mahist army? With them joining, no matter what is done, it will be much faster." Yi Li's brows rose slightly as she looked at Zhang Qilan with an excited and joyful expression. She hadn't thought that Zhang Qilan, who looked like a straightforward martial artist, would be very sensitive to the quality of soldiers on the battlefield. Yi Li didn't dampen his mood and said with a faint smile, "When the prince returns, General Zhang can talk with the prince." With the addition of Feng Zhiyao, this torture expert, the interrogation of this batch of assassins progressed very quickly. Of course, this had to do with the large number of people caught this time, as well as their varied backgrounds. On the morning of the third day of the chaos in the Prince Ding mansion, a thick file appeared on Yi Li's desk. Flipping it open and taking a look, the contents inside were enough to shock anyone. The people who participated in this assassination included the Dechu state, Xiling, northern tribes, and Nanzhao. After reading it, Yili couldn't help but smile bitterly. After so many years, the Ding King mansion had become the target of public criticism. Everyone in the world couldn't wait to get rid of it. However, after this time, there wouldn't be many people who dared to have any ideas about the Ding King mansion. Yili tilted her head to look out the window. Under the bright sunlight, the garden was still filled with flowers. Although it had only been a short 2 days, there was no longer any blood and terror. Wang Fei, Mu Qingsong wants to see Wang Fei. Yili put down the file and smiled. It's only been 3 days and he can't take it anymore. Qin Feng frowned and said, ever since we captured Mu Qingsong, he has been somewhat dispirited. This subordinate obeyed Wang Fei's orders and did not torture him. He was the one who decided to see Wang Fei. Before seeing Wang Fei, he refused to say anything. Yili waved her hand and smiled. It's useless to torture someone like Mu Qingsong. Instead, it might arouse the hatred and desire in his heart. Go and bring him here. Qin Feng disapproved. Wang Fei isn't bringing him to the study a bit, it's fine. He can't cause any waves. Go. Not long after, Mu Qingsong was brought into the study. In just a short 3 days, he had changed from the murderous black-clothed assassin that night to a disheveled prisoner with a haggard face. Seeing that Yili's eyes didn't have the slightest bit of vitality and light, Yili sighed in her heart. Mu Qingsong was indeed old. Withdraw. Yili said to Qin Feng, who was beside Mu Qingsong. Qin Feng's knife-like eyes swept past Mu Qingsong's body and silently left. The study was silent. After a long time, Mu Qingsong said, I didn't expect that the Ding Wang Fu's people would be willing to listen to the orders of a teenage girl. Yili faintly said, it doesn't matter if I'm a teenager or a few decades old. Mr. Mu should recognize my other identity. I'm the Ding Wang Fei. This alone is enough to make them listen to my orders. Mu Qingsong shook his head. Ding Wang Fei. A Ding Wang Fei who can command the Black Cloud Cavalry and the Mahist army is rare even in the history of Dechu state. Yili pursed her lips and smiled. Mr. Mu is too kind. What do you want to know? Mu Qingsong directly asked. Yili didn't hold back and asked, what does Mr. Mu want? Mu Qingsong's expression was indifferent. After a long silence, he asked, presumably, Wang Fei knows this one's identity. Yili smiled as she looked at the man in front of her who was only 40 years old but already had a face full of vicissitudes. She neither admitted nor denied it. Mu Qingsong didn't care and asked, did anyone inquire about this one from Wang Fei these past few days? Yili lowered her eyes and faintly smiled, who does Mr. Mu want to inquire about you? After the assassination of the Ding Wang Fu on the night of death, Mr. Mu felt that there was no one in Chujing who would dare to have any relationship with Mr. Mu. To say something bold, even the current emperor wouldn't dare to admit that he has any relationship with you at this time. Mu Qingsong's expression darkened. He looked at Yili and said, presumably, Wang Fei already knows this one's identity. Yili smiled but didn't say anything. Mu Qingsong's eyes became more certain, you're worthy of being the Ding Wang Fei. This one admires you. Yili shook her head, no, I don't know anything. I only hope that the Ding Wang Fu and my family are safe and sound. Then what does Mr. Mu want? Mu Qingsong's eyes were empty and confused. He muttered, what do I want? Yili lowered her eyes and looked at the hands on the table. She softly said, since Mr. Mu wants to see Ben Fei, there must be something you want to make a deal with Ben Fei. Then, there must be something that Mr. Mu wants. Mu Qingsong was silent for a long time. He raised his head and looked at Yili. Wang Fei must know this one's identity very well. I want to know, what am I in their hearts? Yili looked at him with some pity and said faintly, Mr. Mu, why do you have to be like this? If you want to leave these things, it's not impossible. With Mr. Mu's ability, if you leave the people and matters of Chujing, won't you be able to fly freely in the sky? A trace of sadness flashed through Mu Qingsong's eyes. He shook his head. If I want to leave, this one can do it myself. Isn't that right? Mr. Mu, have you decided? Yi Li confirmed. Mu Qingsong nodded firmly. Yi Li gently nodded. In that case, Mr. Mu, please let Ben Fei see what chips you have. Mu Qingsong said. Wang Fei will definitely be satisfied. On this day, a guest who would never appear in the past suddenly appeared in the Marquis Muyang's residence. Marquis Muyang, who had just received the housekeeper's report, was stunned. His face quickly stiffened. Muyang, who was standing beside him, frowned his haggard handsome face, revealing a puzzled look. He was going to get married in a few days, but there wasn't the slightest joy on his young face. Seeing his father's stiff and defeated expression, Muyang's resentful heart suddenly softened. He asked in a deep voice, "Father, what's wrong?" Marquis Muyang raised his head and glanced at him. He forced a smile and said, "It's nothing. Father is going out to see Princess Consort Ding." Chapter 303. Muyang frowned. Seeing that his father's expression was not good, he said, "It's better for this child to accompany father to see Her Highness. This child has also met Princess Ding a few times." Marquis Muyang was stunned and moved by his son's obvious concern. He shook his head and said, "There's no need. Princess Ding probably has something important to discuss with father. Father will go see her." Seeing that he was so insistent, Muyang did not say anything else. In the study of the Marquis Muyang Fu, Yi Li stood with her hands behind her back, leisurely admiring the famous paintings on the wall. Zhuo Jing stood respectfully at the side. Marquis Muyang pushed open the door and saw the slender figure standing with her back to him. He could not help but be stunned. He quickly reacted and cupped his hands in greetings to Princess Ding. Yi Li turned around and smiled, "My lord, please don't be so courteous. Please forgive me for disturbing your peace." Yi Li's faint voice was very pleasant to the ears. She seemed to have purposely emphasized the word peace. These two words were as shocking as thunder to Marquis Muyang. His heart could not help but thump. He forced a smile and said, "Princess Consort, you must be joking. Your presence brings light to Marquis Muyang's humble dwelling. Wang Fei, please have a seat." Yi Li did not stand on ceremony and sat down opposite Marquis Muyang. After the maidservant served tea, Marquis Muyang looked at Yi Li and Zhuo Jing, who was standing behind him, and said hesitantly, Marquis, there's no need to be so polite. This subordinate is just Wang Fei's subordinate." Zhuo Jing said lightly. Zhuo Jing claimed to be a subordinate, but Marquis Muyang did not dare to treat him as an ordinary subordinate. Although no one knew Zhuo Jing's original identity, but in these 2 months, most of Princess Ding's affairs were handled by Zhuo Jing and Lin Han. It could be said that these two were completely Princess Ding's personal confidants. Yi Li smiled at Zhuo Jing. "Zhuo Jing, sit down and talk. You can't make me and Marquis look up to you when you talk later, right?" Zhuo Jing said he did not dare and sat down at the end of the table. The study seemed to have regained its tranquility. The three of them drank their tea quietly, as if they were competing to see who was more patient. Marquis Muyang's eyes fell on Yi Li and Zhuo Jing. Although he still had a smile on his face, he was secretly complaining in his heart. No wonder the emperor was so afraid of Princess Ding. She clearly knew that Prince Ding was not in the mansion, and that even if she razed the Prince Ding mansion to the ground, it would be of no use, but she still. Princess Ding had such a temperament at such a young age. She would definitely have a bright future. After a long time, Marquis Muyang sighed softly and looked at Yi Li. "Princess Ding, what can I do for you?" Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "I don't dare to advise you. Actually, this consort was appointed by someone to come to the Marquis Hall to discuss a matter." Marquis Muyang put down his teacup and said, "Please speak your mind, Wang Fei. I will tell you everything I know." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Thank you, Marquis Muyang. This consort was entrusted by someone to ask the prince something. Does the prince remember a person called Mu Qingsong?" Marquis Muyang's hand trembled and almost knocked over the teacup beside him, but he quickly steadied himself. Zhuo Jing sat on the side and raised his eyebrows. He clearly saw Marquis Muyang's hand clench tightly twice. He was clearly forcing himself to relax. Marquis Muyang forced a smile and said, "This Marquis naturally knows. Mu Qingcang is known as the #1 expert in the Chu state. He is even ranked above His Highness Prince Ding. Who in the world doesn't know of him?" Yili lowered her head and drank her tea. She smiled faintly and said, "Marquis Muyang is right. Speaking of which, Mu Qingcang and Marquis have the same surname. Do you know him?" Marquis Muyang was silent for a moment before he finally said in a low voice, "Although I have heard of him for a long time, it is a pity that I do not know him." Marquis Muyang really doesn't know Mu Qingcang? Zhuo Jing suddenly asked. Marquis Muyang frowned and said with some displeasure, "What does young Master Zhuo mean? Are you suspecting that this Marquis is lying?" Zhuo Jing raised his eyebrows slightly and did not answer, as if silently agreeing with Marquis Muyang's words. Seeing that Marquis Muyang was about to get angry, Yili put down her teacup and said with a smile, "Don't be angry, Marquis Muyang. It is just that a few days ago, we caught an assassin who claimed to be Mu Qingcang and is an old acquaintance of Marquis Muyang. That is why this consort wanted to ask Marquis Muyang. If Marquis Muyang really doesn't know him, then so be it. After all, he is just an assassin. Since he has fallen into the hands of the Ding Palace, what can he do?" Marquis Muyang frowned and said, "Assassin? But the assassin who handed over the Prince Ding mansion to the Supreme Court did not." Marquis Muyang stopped halfway through his sentence. Everyone knew how important the assassin who handed over the Prince Ding mansion to the Supreme Court was. It was just like how the Prince Ding mansion knew the identity of the mastermind behind the various assassins but did not disclose it. The Prince Ding mansion must have left behind more assassins with more important identities. It was also a secret that everyone knew. It was just that the incident at the Ding Palace that night had made everyone tremble with fear. In the short term, no one would have the guts to break into the Ding Palace. Yili smiled apologetically at Marquis Muyang and said, "Since Marquis Muyang did not know, then this consort has disturbed Marquis Muyang. This consort still has many things to do in the residence, so this consort will take her leave." Marquis Muyang panicked and blurted out, "How does Wang Fei plan to deal with that Mu Qingcang?" Yili's lips curved into a faint smile, indifferent and cold, "It's just an assassin. Just kill him." Marquis Muyang's heart turned cold, but he could only watch as Yili stood up and walked out with Zhuo Jing. Zhuo Jing followed behind Yili. When they reached the door, he suddenly turned back to look at Marquis Muyang, who was still in a daze, and said, "Wang Fei has decided to execute all the assassins tonight as a sacrifice for the soldiers who sacrificed their lives to guard the Prince Ding mansion. If Marquis Muyang wants to see someone, it would be best to hurry." Marquis Muyang's eyes flashed and he forced a smile, "Young Master Zhuo is joking. This Marquis does not have anyone to see." Zhuo Jing nodded nonchalantly and turned to follow. When the footsteps of the two people completely disappeared at the end of the corridor, Marquis Muyang, who was still stiffly maintaining his posture of getting up to send off the guest, suddenly fell back into the chair as if he had used up all his strength. A trace of tiredness and guilt flashed through his old but sharp eyes, but more of it was a kind of desperate determination. "Father." Muyang appeared at the door at some point and looked at his rarely dispirited father with a complicated expression. "Father, did Wang Fei say something to make things difficult for you?" Marquis Muyang waved his hand and said with a smile, "It's nothing. Yang, you are about to get married. Don't worry about these things first. Father will naturally take care of these trivial matters. You just need to be a good bridegroom." Muyang frowned and looked at Marquis Muyang, saying in a low voice, "Father, this child is also a descendant of the Mu family. Is there something that you can't tell me?" Marquis Muyang said, "There is really nothing. Yang, you are thinking too much." Muyang said, "This child is not a fool. Father, what does the assassination at the Prince Ding mansion have to do with our family? Otherwise, why would Princess Ding?" "Shut up. Marquis Muyang suddenly roared and stared sharply at Muyang, his expression cold. Remember clearly, what happened at the Prince Ding mansion has nothing to do with our Mu family. Chapter 304. In fact, this reaction already explained the problem. He looked at his father with a headache and sighed. Father, do you know what you are doing? Marquis Muyang was stunned and lowered his eyes. Father is doing this for the prosperity of Marquis Muyang's residence. Yang He, don't worry. Nothing will happen. You may leave. Muyang wanted to say something, but when he saw his father's expression, he swallowed his words and silently left the study. Back at King Ding's residence, Yili turned back to look at Zhuo Jing behind her. Are you satisfied with this result? Zhuo Jing was silent for a while before he suddenly raised his hand and wiped his face. A thin layer of leather mask was removed from his face, revealing the sorrowful and weathered face underneath. Actually, Mu Qingsong's disguise was not very similar to Zhuo Jing, but not many people had seen Zhuo Jing before. At least, Marquis Muyang had never seen Zhuo Jing before. Zhuo Jing always liked to maintain an expressionless face in front of others, so even Marquis Muyang did not notice anything wrong with Mu Qingsong's stiff expression. Mu Qingsong lowered his head and said indifferently, I admit defeat. Yili did not show any signs of complacency. It's just a deal. Now, tell me what you know. Aren't you afraid that I will break the promise? Yili sneered. If you break the promise, I will kill Marquis Muyang. Mu Qingsong closed his eyes tiredly. I know. I will tell you what I know. Ask. Yili kept the smile on her face and looked at the person in front of her with a serious expression. How did the former Prince Ding Mo Xiuwen die? Mu Qingsong was stunned. He did not expect her to ask such a question the moment she opened her mouth. He was rather straightforward and said calmly, I killed him. Yili raised her brows and did not say anything. Mu Qingsong said, that year, I was ordered to go to the border where the northern tribes were fighting and throw poison into Mo Xiuwen's water to create the illusion that he died of illness. Yili stared at him coldly and sneered. Mr. Mu really dares to say anything. Mu Qingsong didn't care at all and said indifferently, since I promised the princess consort, I will naturally keep my promise. If princess consort doesn't dare to listen, then just pretend that I didn't say anything. Yili snorted and said, Mr. Mu, you only said half of it. Of course, I don't dare to listen. Mu Qingsong lowered his eyes and said, with Wang Fei's intelligence and wisdom, do you still need me to elaborate on the rest? Yili closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and said, well, this consort won't ask Mr. Mu about the mastermind behind the scenes. Mr. Mu, please tell me everything you know. Also, this consort cannot guarantee Mr. Mu's safety. Mu Qingsong said indifferently, it's fine. At this point, it makes no difference to me whether I live or die. In the study, it was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Yili silently looked at the middle-aged man sitting in front of her. Her beautiful face was calm and expressionless, but she still couldn't stop the turbulent waves that surged in her heart because of what she just heard. Mo Xiuwen died young due to illness. Many people could guess that there must be some secrets that outsiders didn't know about, but even Yili didn't think that Mo Xiuwen's death would be related to that person in the palace. That year, when Mo Xiuwen died of illness and the Mahist army suffered a setback, the current emperor had ascended the throne for less than 3 years, and he acted so hastily on the Prince Ding mansion. What else does Princess Consort want to know? Mu Qingsong looked at Yili with a faint smile, and there was a hint of schadenfreude in his expression. Yili said indifferently, everything. Mu Qingsong was startled and stared at Yili, everything? Has Princess Consort thought it through? You must know that this secret is enough to affect the entire De Chu state and even the entire world. Yili smiled coldly. Although this consort has never met the previous Prince Ding, he is my husband's elder brother, and also my elder brother. Moreover, you have fallen into my hands. Do you think that if I don't listen to others, I won't know this secret? Mu Qingsong was silent for a moment, then sighed. Prince Ding is really lucky. Since Princess Consort insists, this one will tell Princess Consort everything. Treat it as repaying Princess Consort for fulfilling this one's wish. Yi Li and Mu Qingsong sat in the study for the entire morning, and no one knew what they talked about. When they came out of the study, their expressions were somewhat grave. Mu Qingsong was escorted away by 2 shadow guards. Before he left, he suddenly turned back to look at Yi Li and smiled. This one can see that Princess Consort is a decisive person. Why don't I give you another piece of information for free? Yi Li said indifferently, I'm all ears. Xi Ling has already decided to send troops to the Dechu state on August 15th. What does Princess Consort plan to do? After he finished speaking, without looking at Yi Li's expression, Mu Qingsong changed his previous decadent and gloomy expression and left with a wild laugh. The smile on Yi Li's lips gradually faded. After looking at the sky above the courtyard for a long time, Yi Li turned and left with a flick of her sleeve. Inform Feng San and Sun Yen to come see me in the study immediately. Feng Xiao and Sun Yen arrived very quickly. The two of them felt that they had arrived at almost the same time. As soon as they entered the study, they saw Yi Li and Zhuo Jing sitting behind the desk and flipping through thick files. Feng Xiao glanced at them casually. They were the confessions of the captured assassins and all kinds of information collected by the Shadow Guard. Raising his eyebrows, Feng Xiao smiled and said, Princess Consort, what happened? Yi Li looked up at him and said, something did happen. Feng Xiao stilled. His originally relaxed figure slowly straightened as he looked at Yi Li with a serious expression. Sun Yan's expression was also solemn as he listened attentively. Yi Li picked up a file and said, just now, Mu Qingsong told me that Xi Ling is preparing to send troops to the Dechu state on August 15th. A startled expression flashed across Feng Xiao's face. His sword-like brows furrowed slightly. Is this information reliable? We have not received any information in this regard. Yi Li shook her head and said, I don't know. Mu Qingsong would not lie. But the authenticity of this information needs to be verified. But... Yi Li paused and looked at the 2 people in front of her and asked, what day is it today? Sun Yen said, August 7th. Feng Xiao's expression also changed. He stood and said, if this information is false, then so be it. But if it is true... If it was true, although the Northwest Air Force was not empty, many of the important positions had been controlled by Imo Jingqi's trusted aides. The Mahist army was restrained everywhere. If the West Hills suddenly attacked, they would definitely be caught off guard. Right now, they were in the capital. It was impossible for them to reach the border in 7 or 8 days. Feng Xiao said thoughtfully, the prince has already left the capital for more than 20 days. According to the speed of the marriage procession, they should have already entered the northern tribes. Not to mention that the prince has the important task of escorting the bride. Even if he did not have anything to do, it would take at least half a month to reach Xi Ling's border to take charge of the situation. Furthermore, the prince could not have received the news immediately. Feng Xiao suddenly had a bad feeling. It seemed that the entire matter was a plot against the Dechu state. Princess Consort. Yi Li frowned and said, what do you think? Just say it. Chapter 305. Sun Yen said with a serious face, whether it's true or not, we have to prepare early. If it's false, it's fine, but if it's true... Feng Xiao's face was grave. He frowned and said, I think this news is very likely to be true, but the Shadow Guard didn't receive any news at all. Yi Li said indifferently, you forgot that there's a person who can be said to be a top expert in intelligence. And now, he's in West Hill. Han Mingyue. Feng Xiao exclaimed. Yi Li nodded slightly. Although the Tianyi Pavilion's influence in Dechu state has been reorganized by Han Mingxi, don't forget that Han Mingyue is the real master of the Tianyi Pavilion. Moreover, the Tianyi Pavilion is spread across all countries. Only Dechu state is damaged. Han Mingyue was once a good friend of the prince. He's the person who knows the Prince Ding mansion the best in the world. Even if he's not the first, he's definitely in the top 3. Feng Xiao nodded and said, I'll send someone to investigate immediately. Sun Yan asked, My lady, what should we do now? Yi Li lowered her eyebrows and pondered for a moment. She said, Send someone to inform the prince immediately. Also, send word to the Mahist army stationed near the border of West Hill to be ready to support the border at any time. Sun Yan said with some difficulty, In the past few years, the Mahist army's encampment has been shrinking again and again. Now, the Mahist army's encampment is at least 5 or 6 days away from the border of West Hill. Including the time it takes for us to send the message, I'm afraid. Yi Li raised her hand and said, Whether it's in time or not, it's too late to stop the Xiling army's advance. Sun Yan nodded and said, I understand. I'll immediately send a message to the Mahist army. Please rest assured, my lady. As long as the Mahist army has a single soldier, the Mahist army won't be able to cross the defense line of the West Hill army. Yi Li nodded and said softly, Thank you, General Sunday. This consort will enter the palace to see the emperor. Princess, I'm afraid that's not appropriate. Feng Xiao frowned. Ever since they caught Mu Qingsong, although they didn't say it clearly, everyone knew who had tried to massacre the Prince Ding mansion. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, There's nothing inappropriate about it. Even if that person in the palace dares to make a move against me, he may not have the ability to keep me here. Feng Xiao thought about the mysterious troops and his heart calmed down a little. He said, Wang Fei knows what to do. Yi Li stood up and put down the file in her hands. She said, Go and do your work. In addition, the mansion will continue to be on full alert. Yes. Imperial Palace. In the Imperial Study, Mo Jingqi dismissed Marquis Muyang, who had hurried over to seek an audience. His face was gloomy and uncertain as he stared at the memorial in front of him, the look in his eyes changing unpredictably. Reporting to Your Majesty, Princess Ding requests an audience. The eunuch outside the door reported. Mo Jingqi frowned. Princess Ding. Why did she come back? Thinking about a few days ago at dawn, the blood-covered ground of the Ding mansion and the white-clothed woman standing gracefully on the steps, Mo Jingqi's heart always felt a sense of loss and regret. He had personally appointed this woman to Mo Xiaoyao in order to humiliate him. But now, this woman had become another pillar of support for the Ding mansion and Mo Xiaoyao's biggest support. At the same time, she had become a target that he had to eliminate. With Yi Li's intelligence, since she had already found the Marquis Muyang's residence, Mo Jingqi didn't believe that she wouldn't be able to guess the truth. But why did she dare to enter the palace now? Let her in. Not long after, the door was pushed open again. Yi Li walked in wearing the Princess Ding mansion's silver-white ceremonial dress with a dark silver luan and phoenix pattern. This was almost the first time that Yi Li had worn the Princess Ding mansion's ceremonial dress. It was different from the elegant and graceful feeling that she usually gave people. The silver-white color made her seem cold and unapproachable like ice. Yi Li walked to the middle of the hall and bowed. Yi Li greets the emperor. Mo Jingqi sized up Yi Li. After a long time, he finally spoke. Speaking of this, Zhen has never heard of Princess Ding calling herself. Yi Li pursed her lips and gave a faint smile. Yi Li is Yi Li, of course. She knew that in front of the emperor, empress, and empress dowager, all the women with official titles referred to themselves as Qinxie. But she didn't like this title. In the past, the emperor, empress, and empress dowager had never mentioned it. Other people naturally didn't dare to find fault with her on such a small matter and ignored it. She didn't think that Mo Jingqi would ask this today. Mo Jingqi's eyes flashed and he quickly smiled. Yi Li is Yi Li. Then in Princess Ding's heart, is she not a subject of the Dechu state? Yi Li raised her head and looked directly at Mo Jingqi without avoiding his gaze. She slowly said, The Ding mansion has protected the Dechu state for generations and has done their best. Yi Li is the Princess Ding mansion, how could she have such a rebellious heart? Mo Jingqi looked at her playfully and said with a smile, Oh? Wang Fei's meaning is that the Ding mansion will never have a rebellious heart. Looking at Mo Jingqi's probing gaze, Yi Li laughed coldly in her heart. She said firmly, the Ding mansion will never do anything to betray the Dechu state. Hearing this, Mo Jingqi was silent for a long time before finally saying, "All right, Zhen believes Princess Ding's words. Why has Princess Ding come to the palace today?" Yili nodded and said, "There is indeed a very important matter to report to your majesty." Mo Jingqi nodded. "Princess Ding, please speak." Yili said softly, "Yili has just received news that Xiling will send troops to the Dechu state on the 15th of the 8th month. Asking your majesty to make early preparations." Mo Jingqi paused and laughed after a long time. He looked at Yili and said, "Princess Ding, isn't this news too sudden? From what Jin knows, Xiling's main goal is to deal with the northern tribes and not the Dechu state. Who did Wang Fei hear this news from?" Yili pursed her lips and frowned slightly. "I hope that your majesty can send troops to support as soon as possible, just in case. Zhen will not send troops just because of Wang Fei's words, unless Wang Fei can prove the authenticity of this news." Yili frowned and said mildly, "Mu Qingsong." Hearing this, Mo Jingqi's expression changed a few times. It took him a while to calm down. He stared at the woman standing calmly in front of him with a complicated expression. For a moment, he could not understand why Yili would so easily reveal her trump card. He didn't believe that the Ding royal residents wanted to fall out with him now. Not to mention that Mo Xiaoyao was not here now. Even if Mo Xiaoyao was in the capital, the Ding royal residents would not suddenly do anything that was disadvantageous to Great Chu. However, if Yili truly wanted to provide some military intelligence, then she would not have openly revealed Mu Qingsong's matter. The Ding king's residents had many sources of information. How could they not find a suitable excuse? After a long time, Mo Jingqi said mildly, "Zhen understands what Princess Ding is saying." Yili raised her head to look at the man on the dragon throne and frowned slightly. Mo Jingqi did not give her a chance to speak. He stood up and waved his hand. "Zhen understands this matter. Princess Ding, you can go back first." Yili sighed softly in her heart. She bowed slightly and said, "Yili will take her leave." After leaving the imperial study, Yili was about to leave the palace and return to her residence when she was stopped. Two familiar palace maids stood in front of Yili and said, "Wang Fei, noble consort invites you." Yili thought for a moment and remembered that these two palace maids were noble consort Lu's personal palace maids. Recalling what she heard in the peach forest and the strange look noble consort Lu gave her every time she looked at her, Yili could not help but take a look. She said mildly, "This consort has something to do. Please apologize to noble consort Lu on behalf of this consort." When the two palace maids heard this, they looked at each other but did not move aside. They insisted, "Wang Fei, please forgive us. Gui Fei Nyang has something important to discuss with Wang Fei." Chapter 306. Yili glanced at the palace maid who spoke, raised her eyebrows and said, "Oh? What if this consort doesn't have the time? Well, please forgive us for offending you." The two of them took a step forward. Their steps were steady, and their eyes flashed. Obviously, they were trained in martial arts. Yili raised her hand slightly, indicating that the shadow guards around her didn't need to show up. She looked behind the two palace maids with a frown and sneered, "Noble consort, you're so bold. You dare to attack me outside the imperial study? If you came to talk to me nicely, why would I attack you?" Noble consort Lu strolled out from the corner of the hall. Her voice was as cold as snow as usual. But Yili couldn't help but think of the sad and mournful voice in the peach forest. Noble consort Lu loved Mo Xiaoyao so much that she couldn't get him. But as Mo Xiaoyao's wife, Yili didn't feel much sympathy for her. So when she saw noble consort Lu come out, she just said indifferently, "No matter what noble consort wants to talk about, have you thought about the consequences of having someone attack me in the imperial palace?" Noble consort Lu's beautiful lips curved into a contemptuous smile. "Consequences? Do you think the emperor will do anything to I for you? In the past, people let you have your way only because of Prince Ding. Now that Prince Ding isn't in the capital, Do you think you can rely on the title of Princess Ding? Yi Li silently looked at the beautiful woman who was staring at her with contempt. From the first time they met, she felt noble consort Lu's contempt and disdain for her. Probably in noble consort Lu's mind, no one but herself was good enough for Mo Xiaoyao. But it was a pity that she had also taken a liking to Mo Xiaoyao. In that case, noble consort Lu, if you have something to say, you can say it here. Yi Li frowned. Noble consort Lu raised her delicate chin slightly, stared at Yi Li, and said, "Come with me." Yi Li smiled faintly and turned to walk out of the palace. Yi Li! Noble consort Lu screamed. Seeing Yi Li turn around and leave without hesitation, noble consort Lu said angrily, "Stop her with I." Two palace maids immediately stepped forward, one on the left and one on the right, blocking in front of Yi Li. A cold light flashed through Yi Li's eyes. A cold light streaked down from her sleeves. Her silvery white clothes drew a dazzling arc under the sunlight, at the same time bringing out two beautiful flowers of blood. Ah! Two blood-curdling screams rang out. The two palace maids held their wrists and looked at the silver-clothed woman in front of them with pale faces. Bright red blood instantly dyed their wide pink sleeves red. Yi Li raised the dagger in her hand and looked at it. The bright red blood slid down the shiny blade and slowly dripped to the soil under her feet. Noble consort Lu, who had always been indifferent, finally couldn't help but change her expression. Although she was not a top master, she was one of the best among women. Even so, she didn't even see how Yi Li did it. Staring coldly at Yi Li in front of her, noble consort Lu didn't say anything for a long time. Yi Li looked straight at noble consort Lu calmly. She didn't intend to apologize or explain her hurting behavior at all. The two palace maids held their wrists and looked at Yi Li with horror and fear in their eyes. Yi Li! You are! Noble consort Lu was so angry that her face turned pale. She stared at Yi Li and said with hatred. Yi Li glanced at her indifferently and turned to walk out of the palace. The two palace maids who had been in front of her hurriedly dodged to the sides. They were afraid that if they blocked the path of the woman in front of them, one of their hands would be crippled. As soon as they walked out of the palace gate, Feng Xiao, Zhuo Jing, and the others were all staring at them. Seeing that Yi Li's face was a bit ugly, Feng Xiao asked worriedly, "Wang Fei, what's wrong? The emperor doesn't believe our words?" Yi Li waved her hand and said, "It's all right. The emperor will know tomorrow whether he believes it or not. Tell the subordinates of the Prince Ding mansion to be on guard at all times. If there is no movement in the palace tomorrow." Feng Xiao's expression changed slightly. He said in a low voice, "Wang Fei plans to mobilize the Mahist army. If so, it will give the emperor an excuse to deal with the Prince Ding mansion." Yi Li looked back at him and asked, "Now that there is no excuse, the emperor won't deal with the Prince Ding mansion. Besides, if it's true, the West Hill will come with great force this time. If it's too late, I'm afraid that the future war won't be up to us. Don't worry, the troops near the capital cannot be mobilized for the time being. The emperor won't be able to find an excuse here. Zhuo Jing, tell Qin Feng to come back and see me later." "Yes." Zhuo Jing said in a low voice, "The information has just been sent. Recently, the troops at the border of the West Hill have been restless since a month ago. I'm afraid that Mu Qingsong's information is true." Yi Li's eyes turned cold. The prince is right. Those useless people at the border should be changed. Return to the Fu. At the morning court the next day, the emperor didn't mention anything about the West Hill sending troops. On the third day, there was still no news from the palace. After the morning court on the fourth day, the emperor summoned a few trusted aides to the imperial study. But there was still no news of the mobilization of troops and provisions. The atmosphere in the Ding King's manor also became heavier along with the silence in the palace. Yi Li was in the study room listening to the matters regarding the morning court. She closed her eyes tiredly and said in a deep voice, "Qin Feng. This subordinate is here." Qin Feng replied in a low voice. "The original assessment is cancelled. You will personally lead the troops and head to the border at full speed tonight." Qin Feng replied without hesitation, "This subordinate accepts the order." Yili raised her head to look at him and said, "I'm not asking you to lead people to the border to participate in the war. Even if each of you can fight against 100 people, you won't be able to stop an army of 100,000. Split up the border and investigate all the information about the West Hill and the war situation." Qin Feng nodded and said, "This subordinate understands. Go." The war broke out faster than Yili imagined because the West Hills troops weren't dispatched on the 15th of the 8th month, but on the 9th of the 8th month. By the 15th of the 8th month, the news of the West Hills invasion had already reached the Chu capital. The even more shocking news was that this time, the West Hill Genom of Gojoseon personally led an army of 500,000 to attack the Dechu state, vowing to wash away the shame of being defeated by Mo Lufang back then. The Shilin army had been honing their strength for several years and was unstoppable. They took 2 cities in one day and the entire Chu capital was shaken. As the mistress of the Ding mansion, Yili was also urgently summoned by the emperor to the palace for a discussion. After a few days, Yili stepped into the imperial study again, but the situation was completely different from the last time. As soon as she stepped into the imperial study, she could clearly feel the solemn atmosphere in the study. Yili glanced at the people in the imperial study. Prime Minister Liu, Marquis Muyang, General Xinghua, Marquis Nan, Marquis Nan's heir, Ling Qingyu, Old Duke Hua, and a young man whom Yili found familiar but didn't know. He wasn't wearing an official's uniform but was standing beside Mo Jingqi's desk in silk clothes. Yili frowned and instinctively disliked this person. This person's shrewd eyes were full of calculation, which ruined his originally handsome face. Yili looked down indifferently. There were 8 people in the study. Prime Minister Liu, Marquis Muyang, and General Xinghua were all the emperor's confidants. Marquis Nan had never cared about worldly affairs. Although old Duke Hua was close to the Prince Ding mansion, he was already old and had been idle at home for many years. Chapter 307. Yili greets Your Majesty. Yili gently bowed. Your subjects greet Your Majesty Ding. Everyone bowed in unison. Mo Jingqi waved his hand in annoyance. Princess Ding, you may dispense with the formalities. Have you heard of the urgent news at the border today, Princess Ding? Yili nodded. Mo Jingqi frowned. What do you think? Old Duke Hua was the first to speak. Of course, we should immediately send reinforcements to attack the Shilin bandits. We must not let the Shilin think that the Dechu state is easy to bully. Mo Jingqi frowned. Old Duke, you've heard it too. The Shilin army will be led by Genom of Gojoseon. Even though the king of the south had been defeated by the prince regent in the past, he was still known as the god of war in the West Hill. Which general do you think should lead the army? Marquis Muyang and the general looked at each other and couldn't help but frown. Old Duke Hua snorted and stepped forward. Although this old subject is old, I'm willing to lead the army and show the might of the Dechu state. Hearing this, Marquis Muyang and the general's expressions changed. Ling Qingyu and Marquis Nan's heir, who were standing behind, stood out from the crowd. This subject is willing to lead the army and show the might of the Dechu state. Mo Jingqi looked at the two and smiled with satisfaction. Old Duke, you're too serious. You're over 70 years old and should be enjoying life. If we let you lead the army, won't the men of the Dechu state be ashamed? What do you think? Your Majesty is wise. Mo Jingqi looked at the courtier who was flattering him and nodded in satisfaction. Then he looked at Yili, who was standing on the side. He hesitated for a moment and frowned. Commander Ling and Marquis Nan's heir are willing to lead the army. Your courage is commendable. However, Prince Ding is not in the capital and cannot lead the army. The hundreds of thousands of troops under the king's estate cannot be mobilized. What does Princess Consort think? Yili raised her brows slightly, raising her head to look at Mo Jingqi. Your Majesty, please forgive me. How can a woman like Yili have any opinions? Princess Ding is belittling herself too much. Who doesn't know that the mistress of the Ding Palace also has the authority to command the Mahist army and the Black Cloud cavalry? Now that the Xiling army has broken the border, is the princess consort and the Ding king's manor going to sit by and do nothing? The young man standing behind Imo Jingqi stared at Yi Li and spoke darkly. Yi Li sneered in her heart. What a big hat! Yi Li glanced at the young man and was about to speak when Du Qua suddenly stepped forward. He stared at the young man and said sternly, "How dare you? Who are you to dare sow discord between His Majesty and Ding Wangfu?" Du Qua had been on the battlefield for decades. Although he was old, he was still shrewd. How could a young man withstand the majestic aura he released? The young man was startled. His expression stiffened before he bowed to Du Qua. Student Tan Jiji greets Du Qua. Du Qua snorted discontentedly and looked at Imo Jingqi. Imo Jingqi smiled and said, "Old Duke, please don't be angry. The successor is an extremely talented young man. I'm planning to give him the position of Imperial Study Advisor to serve the country." Du Qua bowed to Imo Jingqi and stroked his white beard. He said clearly, "Your Majesty, this old official does not understand your words. Since this young Master Tan is talented, why doesn't he participate in the imperial examinations? If he obtains the title of Zhuang Yuan and Tanhua, no one can say anything even if His Majesty places him in an important position. The Imperial Study Advisor is an important position. If you give it to someone you have never heard of, I'm afraid it will be hard to convince the public." Imo Jingqi and the young man were also somewhat embarrassed. It was not that they did not want to go through the normal channels, but the path of the imperial examinations was not easy to walk. Especially this year's imperial examinations. Putting aside the fact that the main examiner was De Chu State's most upright and honest elder Su, 3 out of the 5 sons of the Su family would be participating in the examinations. Tan Jiji had studied a lot and did not have much confidence in the imperial examinations. Even if he did pass, if he was not the Zhuang Yuan, Tanhua, and Tanhua of the imperial examinations, he would most likely be sent out. Even if he was not sent out, he would at most be a 6th or 7th grade minor official. It was impossible for him to have such an important position as the Imperial Study Advisor. Originally, when the emperor wanted to promote one of his trusted aides, no one would meddle in other people's business. But the mistake was that Tan Jiji should not have instigated the relationship between the emperor and Ding Wangfu in front of all the officials at this time. This made old Du Qua, who was wholeheartedly devoted to the country, feel that he was an eyesore. Thus, he completely did not consider giving him any face. Imo Jingqi coughed softly, saying, "Old Duke, let's discuss this later. Right now, the most important thing is to send out troops. Prince Ding is not here, and the Mahist army is unable to mobilize hundreds of thousands of troops. What should we do?" Du Qua did not really want to embarrass the emperor, so he cooperated and said, "Prince Ding will definitely rush back as soon as he receives the news. Before that, why doesn't Your Majesty mobilize troops from other places to support him?" Imo Jingqi shook his head and sighed, saying, "Old Duke, you also know that the south is currently in a standoff with Prince Li. The people of Nanzhao outside Shattered Snow Pass are also eyeing us covetously. How can we mobilize troops from other places?" Du Qua's expression changed slightly. His snow-white brows moved, but he did not speak. It was not that he did not understand the emperor's thoughts. However, taking advantage of Prince Ding's absence to make things difficult for Princess Ding, and even disregarding the safety of the border, this was not something a qualified emperor should do. Marquis Muyang stepped forward, saying, "Since Princess Ding is able to mobilize the Mahist army and Black Cloud cavalry, Princess Ding, please consider the overall situation and order the Mahist army to immediately rush to the border to support." Yi Li raised her head, her gaze calmly sweeping over Marquis Muyang. She said softly, "Marquis Muyang means that you want me to lead the army in place of Prince Muyang?" Marquis Muyang choked. Since ancient times, even if there were 1 or 2 female generals, there had never been a female general who led the army into battle. Furthermore, Princess Ding was only in her teens. Even if she did not do anything now, no one could say anything against her. On the contrary, if Princess Ding really led the army into battle, the Chu state and these generals would lose all their face. With a dry laugh, Marquis Muyang avoided Yi Li's eyes, saying, "This marquis did not mean that. I only hope that Princess Consort can prioritize national affairs." Prime Minister Liu on the side also stroked his white beard and said with a smile, "Marquis is right. I hope that Princess Consort can temporarily transfer the authority of the Maoist army to the general leading the army for the sake of the people and soldiers at the border. When Prince Ding returns, it will naturally be returned to its rightful place." Yi Li did not even bother to conceal the mockery in her eyes. When Prince Ding returns? Did they think she was a fool? Yi Li raised her head and smiled. The Prime Minister's words make this concubine unable to bear the burden of the responsibility. Let's not talk about whether I can mobilize the Maoist army. Let's talk about Prime Minister Liu. Do you think that as long as I say the word, the authority of the Maoist army can be transferred to anyone? I'm afraid that even if Prince Ding comes personally, he can't do it. Mo Jingqi's expression darkened, frowning. Then does Princess Consort have any good ideas? Are we going to let the Xiling army wreak havoc at the border and even invade our Dechu state? Yi Li wanted to slap the man who was sitting on the dragon throne, staring at her and talking to her in such a dignified manner. If she did not agree, was she going to let the Xiling army wreak havoc in the Dechu state? She finally understood why Mo Xiaoyao did not appear anxious at all these days. It turned out that he wanted to take advantage of Mo Xiaoyao's absence to seize the authority of the Maoist army. It was not that he was not anxious, but in his eyes, the Xiling army at the border was not as important as the authority of the Prince Ding mansion that was about to be in his hands. However, Yi Li did not understand where Mo Jingqi's confidence came from. Did he think that as long as he got the authority of the Prince Ding mansion, he could immediately control it freely and even lead the army to expel the West Hill? Did he not consider that if he was not careful, it could cause a mutiny? Chapter 308. Yi Li lowered her head and said, "Yi Li is just a woman. I really don't have any good ideas for your Majesty to consider. Please forgive me, Your Majesty." Du Qua furrowed his brows and said somewhat anxiously, "Your Majesty, since the military power of the Ding King's manor is uncertain, please send Prince Ding back to the capital as soon as possible. No, directly head to the border to lead the troops. Also, this old subject remembers that our Dechu state has millions of soldiers. Other than the Maoist army and the army in the south that is confronting King Li, we can at least send out 100,000 soldiers to support the border. Your Majesty, please send out a group of troops first." Although Mo Jingqi was somewhat unwilling, it was not easy to refute Du Qua's words. Just as he was hesitating, Marquis Nan, who had been silent all this time, spoke up, "Your Majesty, the old duke's words are reasonable. Please send troops to support the border first. The Xiling army took down 2 cities in 1 day and will reach Xinyang in at most 10 days. Xinyang is the northwest granary of Dechu state. If Xinyang falls..." Mo Jingqi's expression changed. He glanced at Yi Li and gritted his teeth. "Pass down Jin's decree. Leng Qingyu will be the main general, and Marquis Nan's heir will be the second. Let 150,000 soldiers and set off today." This general obeys. Leng Qingyu and Marquis Nan's heir bowed in unison. Mo Jingqi's mood was clearly not good. With a gloomy face, he waved his hand and dismissed everyone. After leaving the imperial study, Yi Li accompanied old Du Qua out of the palace on foot. Along the way, old Du Qua had nothing to say and could only sigh endlessly. When they reached the palace gates, he stopped and looked at Yi Li, saying, "It just so happens that Prince Ding is not in the capital at this time. It's been hard on Princess Consort." Yi Li pursed her lips and smiled faintly. "I've caused old Duke to worry. These are only part of Yi Li's duties." Old Du Qua shook his head and said, "Your Majesty is really taking it too lightly this time. At the end of the day, he was born in the hands of a woman. Compared to the previous emperor, he is still far inferior." Yi Li understood what the old Duke of Hua meant. When the late emperor ascended the throne, the West Hill and the Dechu state were at war for many years. At that time, Prince Ding Mo Lufang was not only outstanding in governance, but also had outstanding military achievements. He could be said to be the first person after Mo Lanyun in the Ding royal residence. Even with such a great reputation, the late emperor was able to endure and treat Mo Lanyun with great respect and courtesy, all the way until the late emperor's wings were fully grown, and Mo Lufang relinquished power to him. Although he wasn't a wise ruler, he was still a capable ruler who kept his position. The relationship between him and the Prince Regent became a legend. And now Mo Jingqi had prematurely expressed his hostility towards the Prince Ding mansion. Even when Prince Ding had clearly become a cripple and was hiding in the Ding mansion, he did not give up on suppressing him and suppressing the Mahist army. If he was truly a genius with great talent, it would be fine, but his strength was not enough to suppress the Mahist army. Even if Mo Xiaoyao was willing to hand over the Mahist army to him, it was still the same question. Could he really command the Mahist army? With his breadth of mind, could he treat the Mahist army kindly? Duke, be careful with your words. Yi Li softly chuckled. Duke Hua waved his hand, indicating that Yi Li did not need to send him off, and turned to walk towards his carriage. After watching Duke Hua get on the carriage, Yi Li turned back to see the Marquis Nan's heir standing not far away and smiling at her. Yi Li helplessly sighed in her heart. She had only met this brother-in-law a few times and had eaten at the same table in the Yi mansion. It could be said that she was completely unfamiliar with him. Now that the Yi family had declined, Yi Zhen's life in the Marquis Nan's mansion was not bad. It could be seen that the people in the Marquis Nan's mansion knew how to conduct themselves. Because of this, Yi Li was also somewhat polite to him. "Greetings, princess." Yi Li nodded and smiled faintly. "Heir is too polite." "Heir, is there something you need?" The Marquis Nan's heir smiled. "Nothing. Zhen or Mrs. Princess very much. If Princess is free, why don't you come to the mansion and sit for a while?" Hearing this, Yi Li raised her brows in surprise. Currently, the emperor's attitude towards the Prince Ding mansion could be seen by anyone. At this time, as the heir, he still invited her to the mansion as a guest. Yi Li's eyes flashed slightly, and she smiled. "It is eldest sister's fortune to be able to meet heir. I hope heir will take good care of her." The Marquis Nan's heir smiled generously. "Since Zhen has entered the Marquis Nan's mansion, I naturally treat her as family." "Don't worry, princess." Yi Li nodded and said, "Heir will set off for the border tomorrow. I wish you a safe journey." "Thank you, princess," the Marquis Nan's heir said. "I will take my leave." "I won't see you out," Yi Li said. After watching him walk away, Yi Li looked back at the towering palace gate behind her, frowned, and turned to leave. Ling Qingyu and the Marquis Nan's heir hurriedly led the troops away the next day. Yi Li, who was standing at the city gate to see them off, looked at the army in the distance, but her frown did not relax. Xiling Genim of Gojoseon was known as the Xiling war god and had been in charge of the Xiling country for decades. Even Mo Xiaoyao might not dare to say that he was certain of victory. Could Ling Qingyu and the Marquis Nan's heir really succeed with a mere 100,000 troops? "What's wrong, princess?" Zhuo Jing followed beside Yi Li and asked while looking at her expression. Yi Li shook her head. Mo Xiaoyao was not the only general in the Dechu state. If she relied on Mo Xiaoyao for everything, she would not be able to do anything. "Third sister." "Princess." Yi Zhen's voice came from behind. Yi Li turned back and saw Yi Zhen standing beside the heir consort, looking at her in surprise. After not seeing her for a long time, Yi Zhen looked much paler and more haggard than the last time she saw her. Even her eyes were still red, probably because she was worried about her husband going to the battlefield. The Marquis Nan's heir consort was also a woman from a scholarly family and looked very gentle and virtuous. When she saw Yi Li, she stepped forward and bowed. Then, she politely asked Yi Zhen to speak with Yi Li alone. The two sisters were not very familiar with each other and only saw each other a few times a year. For a moment, they were speechless. After a moment of silence, Yi Zhen asked in a low voice, "Has Princess gone home to visit?" Yi Li shook her head. Now that the Yi family was in decline, old Madame Yi clearly blamed everything on Yi Li. Every time she saw her, she would use her words to pressure her. After so many years, this was the first time that Yi Li realized that old Madame Yi was so unafraid of power. Even though Minister Yi did not say anything, the expression on his face faintly showed his dissatisfaction with this daughter of the princess. Yi Li was not someone who liked to make things difficult for herself. Other than when it was necessary, she was too lazy to go back. Yizhen said in a low voice, "Father plans to go back to his hometown in a few days." Yi Li nodded and said, "It's good to go back. If he teaches rowing well, the family will still have some wealth. In the future, father and grandmother can enjoy their old age." With the current situation, the Yi family had already withdrawn from the officialdom. Leaving Jing City was the best choice. Otherwise, if he were to be embroiled in those schemes again, it wouldn't be a simple matter of resigning from his position as an official. Yizhen's beautifully decorated brows furrowed slightly. She looked at Yi Li and said, "Third sister, do you really hate father so much that you can't help father?" Yi Li shook her head and said softly, "Everyone, it is because I don't hate father that I say it is right for him to go back now. Nothing is more important than life." Chapter 309. There was a trace of confusion in Yi Li's eyes, but there was more disbelief. She looked at Yi Li and sighed bitterly, "Second sister is dead, and I don't know if fourth sister is alive or dead. Fifth sister and sixth sister. Let's not talk about them. How can we sisters? Eldest sister, the Southern Marquis estate is still a kind family. The heir consort is also a smart person. She won't make things too difficult for you. You should live your life well," Yi Li said in a low voice. Yizhen was startled. When she came back to her senses, Yi Li was already far away. A trace of sorrow and unwillingness appeared in her eyes as she said faintly, "I don't have a child, and I don't have a family. How can I live my life well? Third sister, not everyone has such a good life like you." News from the border came day by day, and the atmosphere in the entire imperial court became more and more solemn. The Xiling army took 3 cities in a row for half a month and approached Xinyang. On the 9th day of the 9th month, news came that Ling Qingsong and the Southern Marquis heir had led 100,000 troops to reinforce Xinyang. Marquis Zhennan had personally led 50,000 troops to intercept and kill them. More than half of them were lost, and the remaining troops retreated to Xinyang. On the 10th day of the 9th month, Xinyang was surrounded. At the same time, the Xiling army split into 3 groups and advanced to the north, south, and center. Urgent requests for reinforcements came from all the checkpoints at the border. However, at this time, Prince Dinghua, who had been protecting the Dechu state for 100 years, was still nowhere to be seen. The Dinghua estate was as busy as a marketplace every day. Princess consort. In the study, Yi Li looked up at Director Mo at the door and asked, "Who wants to see you?" Director Mo said in a low voice, "Duke Hua and Marquis Nan request an audience." Marquis Nan's heir went missing in the chaos. Missing? How could? Yi Li frowned. She somewhat understood why Duke Hua and Marquis Nan were here. However, this was truly a bit difficult for her. Sighing softly, Yi Li said, "Invite Duke Hua and Marquis Nan in." Not long after, Duke Hua and Marquis Nan arrived at the door. Yi Li personally stood up to welcome them. She stopped the 2 who were about to bow and said, "There are no outsiders here, so there's no need for formalities. Old Duke, Marquis, please have a seat." The 2 thanked her and sat down. The maidservant served tea. Yi Li asked, "Old Duke and Marquis Nan came together. Is it because of the border?" Marquis Nan looked haggard. He let out a long sigh and said, "I'm sorry to have disturbed Princess." Yi Li shook her head and said, "Shitzi and I are not outsiders. Marquis need not worry. This consort will immediately order people to search for the heir at the border." Marquis Nan shook his head and sighed, "My son is loyal to the country. Whether he lives or dies is up to fate. However, "Princess, the Prince Ding mansion must have received the news at the border faster than us. If this continues, I'm afraid that before His Highness Prince Ding returns, the hundreds of thousands of troops at the border will be wiped out." Yi Li also sighed softly and said, "Shilin Genom of Gojoseon has been conserving his strength for more than 10 years. How can it be so easy for him to make a comeback?" However, although the Prince Ding mansion has already sent news to the northern tribes, there is still no news from the prince. This consort is also helpless. Du Qua sighed heavily and said, "It's just a marriage escort. Why would the emperor send Prince Ding out? Unfortunately, the only general who can lead troops to war, General Murong, is far away in Yongzhou. The general of Jing Kingdom is guarding the border of the northern tribes." This old man. With a long sigh, Du Qua suddenly stood up and was about to walk out. "This old man will go to the palace to see the emperor. Let this old man lead the troops to war." Yi Li and Marquis Nan hurriedly pulled him back. Marquis Nan smiled bitterly, "Old Duke, even if we have to lead the troops to war, it should be us. How can we let you trouble yourself?" Looking at the two old men whose ages added up to more than 120 years, Yi Li smiled helplessly in her heart. She understood why they came, but she couldn't blame them. Because they were different from Imo Jingqi, Prime Minister Liu, and Marquis Muyang. They were really worried about the shadow guard of the Dechu state and the people at the border. Because she used to be a soldier, she couldn't resent them just because of this. Old Duke, Marquis, Du Qua turned back and saw Yi Li's clear and calm eyes. He was startled and sat down again. Du Qua said somewhat apologetically, "Princess consort, don't blame this old man for insensibly disturbing you at this time." "It's really," Yi Li shook her head, "Old Duke, you're too serious." "Yi Li understands." Du Qua said, "Now that Xiao Yao isn't here, it's not easy for a woman like you to support such a large Ding kingdom. How can this old man not know? It's just that the border is in a state of emergency. I'm afraid we can't wait for Prince Ding to return. This old man has heard of Princess Consort's abilities. I ask Princess Consort to do something for the sake of the lives of Dechu State's people and the soldiers at the border. This old man just said that it's definitely not necessary to lead the troops to war. This old man is well aware of Princess Consort's misgivings. If Princess Consort trusts this old man will personally lead the troops. At the very least, we can hold on until the day Prince Ding returns. No matter how anxious the emperor is, he won't think of seizing this old man's military power at the last minute. Once Prince Ding returns, he will rush to the border and regain control of the troops. Then, everything will be settled. What do you think, Princess Consort?" Yi Li said with a bitter smile, "Old Duke, are you so sure that Yi Li can mobilize the Mahist army?" Du Qua raised his white eyebrows and looked askance at Yi Li, "Then can Princess Consort do it?" "If Princess Consort says no, this old man will get up and leave." Yi Li was silent for a while. Then, she raised her head and said, "The military power cannot be given to Old Duke. It's not that Yi Li doesn't trust Old Duke, but even if Old Duke is given the army tally, I'm afraid it won't be easy to mobilize." A trace of disappointment flashed across Du Qua's and Marquis Nan's eyes. However, they heard Yi Li lightly say, "Yi Li will accompany you to the border. It's just that the old Duke is already old and I'm afraid that he won't be able to travel long distances." Marquis Nan said happily, "If Princess trusts me, I will immediately request the Emperor to lead the troops to battle. No, I can also take the position of Deputy General and leave the position of Commander-in-Chief until Prince Ding returns." Du Qua looked at Yi Li with slight shock. His eyes were full of praise. He nodded and said, "Good, Xiaoyao really has good eyes. I'll have to trouble Princess Consort this time." Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, "Old Duke, don't be happy too early. No matter how good our plans are, the Emperor may not unify." Du Qua said in a heavy voice, "If the Emperor is truly the ruler of a country, he will naturally agree." Hearing this, Marquis Nan stilled. He looked outside the study and said in a low voice, "Old Duke, you can't say this." After sending off Du Qua and Marquis Nan, Yili returned to the study and saw Feng Zhiao standing under the bookshelf with his head down as he flipped through a book. Hearing her footsteps, he turned his head and said worriedly, "Did Princess Consort really agree to old Duke and Marquis Nan going to the border?" "You heard?" Yili smiled faintly. She walked back to sit behind the desk and said, "Shi Ling is coming aggressively. It is impossible for the Mahist army to stay out of this, even if the prince is not here. Perhaps people can understand why I am not giving them military power right now. However, once the war situation worsens, no reason will work. Everyone in the world will only see the Dechu state being trampled by foreign tribes. The Mahist army will turn a deaf ear to this. Also, since we will have to send troops sooner or later, the earlier we enter the battlefield, the earlier we can control the situation. Besides, even if I agree, that person in the palace may not agree." Chapter 310. Feng Zhiao laughed coldly. "If he doesn't agree, in the future, when the world talks about it, it will have nothing to do with us." Yili nodded. "It's already been so long. If the prince's side is successful, our army will reach the border. The prince should be rushing back." At the mention of Mo Xiaoyao, Feng Zhiao could not help but frown. It's already been so many days. Why is there still no news from the prince? Perhaps someone doesn't want him to come back. The fact that there is no news at all means that he is still fine. Go prepare. Also, tell Director Mo that if the Southern Marquis' heir's concubine comes, ask her to return first. Yes. Feng Zhiao nodded. After a moment of hesitation, he said, "Princess Consort, this time, Feng San will accompany you to the border." Yili frowned. "If the prince and I are not in the Prince Ding mansion, although nothing will happen, we still need someone to stay behind to support the situation." Feng Zhiao said, "It's enough with Uncle Mo around. Although the Prince Ding mansion is heavily guarded, it is not of much use to the Mahist army. Besides, Director Mo has been managing the Prince Ding mansion for decades. He is much better than an outsider like me." Yili was silent for a moment. "I understand. You go first. I will consider it later. Since you are preparing to go to war together, you should go and say goodbye to the people you should." Feng Zhiao was stunned for a moment, then a bitter smile appeared on his face as he said, "I'm just a prodigal son. Why would I need to say goodbye to anyone?" Yili looked at him with a smile and said, "There's no point in lying to yourself. Don't regret it when it's too late." Feng Zhiao was a little absent-minded. After a moment, he recovered and walked out in a daze. As expected, Mo Jingqi did not even listen to Duquois and Marquis Nan's suggestions before decisively rejecting them in the morning court. Yili did not care about this. Instead, as soon as the morning court ended, Su Hongyan and Su Qingze both rushed to Prince Ding's manor. Su Hongyan didn't say much. Although he didn't hold an important position, he could see the current situation more clearly than the people involved. After exhorting them, he sighed and turned to leave. Su Qingze was as taciturn as usual. Before he left, he said, "If you insist on going, I'll ask His Majesty tomorrow to go with you to the border." Yili smiled faintly and said, "Ergu is about to get married. If I delay the marriage because of Li, won't Aunt Qin and Aunt be angry with me later? There are many guards in the Prince Ding mansion. Ergu, you don't have to worry." Su Qingze frowned, saying, "Let's go together. Uncle, father, and grandfather will also be more assured." After speaking, he didn't wait for Yili to say anything else and turned to leave. Bad news from the border came day after day. Although the people far away in the capital could not see the carnage, the number of cities lost and the number of casualties was still shocking. There were more and more people in the capital requesting the Prince Ding mansion to send out troops. The people were already used to the fact that there would always be a black army protecting their safety at all times. But this time, the war had already started for almost a month, but there was still no news of the Ding Palace and the Mo family army. This made many commoners and even the high-ranking officials and dignitaries feel uneasy. The hearts of the people in the capital were uneasy. When the news that Prince Ding was far away in the northern tribes and that the Princess Ding mansion would take his place to go to war was rejected by the emperor, the court was silent. However, the commoners gradually began to discuss it. They were naturally dissatisfied with the emperor's decision, but at this time, Mo Jingqi didn't have the courage to suppress the discussions. This caused the commoners in the capital to send in a flood of letters, almost drowning half of the imperial study. 3 days later, Mo Jingqi finally announced in the morning court with a black face that Marquis Nan would be the deputy general and that the Princess Ding mansion would accompany the army to go to war against the Xiling invasion. Receiving the decree, Yili pursed her lips inwardly and turned to return to her room to prepare. The news that the Mahist army was about to go to war caused the entire capital to be excited. It was as though as long as the Mahist army went out, the Xiling army would be defeated like a landslide. Yili saw this and couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Mo Xiaoyao was right. For so many years, the power of the Prince Ding mansion had directly caused the Dechu state to have fewer famous generals. Once something happened to the Prince Ding mansion, the Dechu state's situation was truly worrying. Of the 800,000 Mahist army stationed near the capital, only 50,000 men led by General Zhang Qilan were stationed there. These 50,000 men were said to be used to protect the capital, so they couldn't follow Yili's army to the border. Yili and Marquis Nan needed to bring people to a place a few hundred li away from the capital to meet up with the troops stationed there. Then, they could rush to the border. This also eliminated the need for a send-off and swearing ceremony. It just so happened that Yili didn't like this kind of pretentious display and was naturally satisfied with this somewhat sloppy arrangement. Most of the people from the Prince Ding mansion still had to stay in the capital to guard their respective duties. Only Feng Xiao and Zhuo Jing accompanied Yili to the battlefield, as well as Yunting who had been thrown into the military camp for quite some time, and Su Qingze who had somehow managed to convince Mo Jingqi. Because Su Qingze insisted on going to the border, Yili felt very guilty towards Qin Zheng, whom she hadn't seen for quite some time. On the contrary, Qin Zheng, who had come to send them off, smiled understandingly at Yili and reminded them to be careful on the road and to return soon. In addition, for some reason, Mo Jingqi stuffed Mu Yang with them before leaving. Mo Jingqi said that Prince Ding's return was uncertain and that Marquis Nan was getting old, so he sent Mu Yang to be Nanho's errand boy. Yili and Marquis Nan didn't say much about this. Everyone was well aware of why Mo Jingqi sent Mu Yang with them. Although Mu Yang was a young talent, the others weren't to be trifled with. No one could predict what would happen on the battlefield. They didn't have to fall out with the emperor over such a small matter. The group galloped on their horses. In just a little more than a day, they arrived at the military town of Hengshui, which was located 500 li away from the Chu capital. Hengshui city wasn't prosperous and grand, but there were nearly 100,000 Mahist army stationed 20 li to the west of the city. Troops stationed in other places were also rushing in this direction. In the next few days, nearly 300,000 soldiers would gather here. By the time they arrived at Hengshui city, it was already sunset. Yili reined in her horse and turned back to say to Marquis Nan, "Marquis, General Sun brought people to Hengshui last night. Let's not enter the city and go directly to the Hengshui camp." Marquis Nan looked approvingly at Yili, who was sitting upright on the horse, and said, "Let's do as Princess says." After galloping for a day and night, even an ordinary man wouldn't be able to bear it. Princess Ding, however, was still calm and composed. There wasn't even a trace of fatigue on her face. This caused Marquis Nan and Mu Yang to be both surprised and impressed. The Hengshui camp was located at the foot of a mountain 20 li to the west of Hengshui city. In front of them was an endless plain, and behind them was the Hengshui mountain range. It was a natural training ground. When the group was still 5 or 6 li away from the Hengshui camp, the local general stationed there and General Sun Yan, who had arrived early last night, came to greet them. "This general greets Princess." Yili nodded slightly and asked, "Where is the Hengshui camp's commanding general?" A middle-aged man with white hair and beard stepped out. He was already 40 or 50 years old but was still in high spirits. He cupped his hands to Yili and said, "This General Lu Jingxian, the commanding general of the Hengshui camp, greets princess. Chapter 311. Yi Li dismounted her horse and raised her hand. General Liu, there's no need to be so courteous. This is the vice commander of the Western Expedition, Marquis Nan. This is Marquis Muyang's heir, Lieutenant Muyang. Yi Li didn't introduce Xue Jing, Yun Ting, and the others standing behind her. The generals understood that they were on the same side and only went forward to greet Marquis Nan and Muyang. Marquis Nan was someone who had been on the battlefield and naturally didn't care about the trifles in front of these generals. He very straightforwardly greeted everyone. As for Muyang, although he had the status of Marquis Muyang's heir, his position in the army was only a lieutenant. Any of the generals present had a higher position than him. Naturally, there wasn't much room for him to speak. He just followed Marquis Nan and exchanged a few words with everyone. Fortunately, although Muyang grew up smoothly, he didn't develop the bad habit of being arrogant. The scene could be considered harmonious and cheerful. After the greetings, Marquis Nan asked seriously, General Liu, is the army ready to depart? Lu Jingxian didn't hesitate and said clearly, the army is ready to depart. As long as Wang Fei and Marquis Yi give the order, we can depart at any time. Feng Zhiyao smiled, General Liu, we are really tired from the journey. Let's depart tomorrow morning. Lu Jingxian looked at everyone and said with a smile, General Feng is right. This old man didn't think it through. Wang Fei, Marquis Yi, please return to the camp to rest for the night. It will also allow the soldiers to conserve their energy. In the vast camp, it was already quiet at night. They were going to depart early tomorrow morning, so most of the soldiers went to bed early. Of course, this didn't include the generals who were sitting in the tent discussing matters. In the tent, Yi Li changed into a light blue robe and sat in the main seat in the center. Below her sat Feng Zhiyao, Lu Jingxian, Sun Yan, and the other generals according to their ranks. As for the deputy commanders, Nan Ho and Muyang, they had already been invited to rest after the discussion. This was the first time that all the generals had seen Yi Li, the mistress of the Ding King's residence. Rather than saying that they respected Yi Li's identity as Princess Ding, they respected the jade pendant on her waist. A general stood up and said, Wang Fei, when will the prince be able to return? Wang Fei only had the status of supervising the troops. As the deputy commander, Marquis Nan was the person with the highest authority in the Mahist army. Although Marquis Nan had always been neutral, it still made these generals who were loyal to the Prince Ding mansion feel uneasy. Yi Li shook her head lightly and said, the prince is far away in the northern tribes. He will need some time to rush back after receiving the news. But now, the war at the border could not wait for prince's return. Or, if the prince is not here, the generals will not fight? All the generals were stunned. Yi Li continued, I understand everyone's loyalty to the Prince Ding mansion and the prince. However, this consort also hopes that all of you can understand one thing. What exactly does the Mo family army exist for? Her clear and beautiful eyes lightly swept over everyone. It is for the peace of the people of Great Chu. Every Mahist army soldier also has parents and children. Protecting the De Chu state is protecting the Mahist army's own family. Everyone was silent. Lu Jingxian said with some hesitation, do we really have to listen to Marquis Nan's command? Yi Li said, if Marquis Nan and the Mahist army have the same goal, why can't we temporarily listen to his command? The prince cannot rush back now. This is reality. Can we tell the West Hill people that Prince Ding is not here and that we will fight again in a few days? Hearing this, everyone's expressions couldn't help but twist. Feng Zhiyao smiled and said, Wang Fei, I think everyone is worried that if the Mahist army listens to Marquis Nan's command, will it be disadvantageous to us if he obtains the military power of the Mahist army? Yi Li raised her eyebrows and smiled, Marquis Nan will not obtain the military power of the Mahist army. I will follow Marquis Nan at any time. Even so, there are some disadvantages. But right now, this is the only way. Speaking of which, Marquis Nan is temporarily acting as the commander-in-chief. He cannot personally attend every battle. So, I will have to trouble the generals on the battlefield. Everyone said in unison, we will not disappoint Wang Fei. Yi Li nodded and said, I will have to trouble the generals. How much do you know about the situation at the front? As soon as she said this, the tent immediately fell silent. Although they had a grudge against the people sent by the emperor, it was also because the emperor had spared no effort to suppress the Mahist army these past few years. Originally, the Mahist army was scattered to guard the various borders of the Dechu state. However, because Emo Jingqi was worried, he took advantage of the time when Prince Ding was recuperating in the mansion and the Mahist army was greatly weakened to transfer all the Mahist army inland. Almost all the soldiers stationed at the borders were the emperor's trusted aides or generals who didn't get along well with the Prince Ding mansion. And now, West Hill had invaded the Dechu state. They were also invading the land that they had protected for generations. How could they not be anxious? Lu Jingxian said in a low voice. This time, West Hill came prepared. Genom of Gojoseon personally led 300,000 soldiers to invade the border. According to the news from the front, there are several 100,000 soldiers surrounding Xinyang. The soldiers sent by the imperial court have found Genom of Gojoseon and lost more than half of their ambush. In the past few days, we've discussed this. I'm afraid that Xinyang city will not be able to be defended. Everyone's expressions were ugly. Xinyang was the granary of the northwest. Once Xinyang was lost, not only would they lose a city and a pond, but the food of the people and even the army would also be threatened. Yi Li thought for a moment, then asked, based on the speed of our march, what is the worst that can happen? Lu Jingxian said, the Xiling army will cross Xinyang and occupy the entire Qingzhou. Then they will enter the palace and enter Hanzhou's Jiangxia town. Yi Li raised her brows. Lu Jingxian explained, there are 50,000 of our soldiers stationed near Jiangxia. The main commander, General Yuan Pei, is also a veteran of the battlefield. Right now, he should have gone to reinforce Xinyang. Once Xinyang is lost, he should lead the troops to retreat to Jiangxia. If we continue on our way, we should be able to reinforce Jiangxia in time. Yi Li nodded. She had analyzed this with Feng Zhiyao before, and the conclusion was similar to Lu Jingxian's. Yi Li rubbed her forehead and asked, you only talked about the situation of the middle army of West Hill. What about the south and north? Lu Jingxian said, the south and north have at least 150,000 soldiers each. They are attacking Jiayi Pass in the south and Tianyun Pass in the north. Although the border guards are doing their best to resist, I'm afraid that the situation is not optimistic. Who is leading the south and north? Lu Jingxian shook his head. Sun Yan said, Princess, it is said that the south is led by Lei Tingfeng, Crown Prince of Genom of Gojoseon. This person has been taught by Genom of Gojoseon since he was young. When he was 19 years old, he fought against the northern tribes on the battlefield. He is not to be underestimated. The commander of the north is a veteran of West Hill, Sheng Wanyi. This person does not have any great achievements, and he is over 60 years old. But, he is the teacher of Genom of Gojoseon in West Hill. Yi Li nodded. After thinking for a long time, she raised her head and said, thank you for your hard work today. We will depart early tomorrow morning. Everyone should go back and rest. Everyone stood up and bid farewell to Yi Li, then turned and left. Only Feng Zhiyao, Zhuo Jing and Su Qingze were left in the tent. Feng Zhiyao smiled as he looked at Yi Li's deeply furrowed brows and said, West Hill is coming aggressively. Does Princess have a headache? Yi Li smiled bitterly and said, how can I not have a headache? She was not a peerless genius. Frankly speaking, she did not have the energy for such a large-scale war. If it was a small group of special operations, she was confident that she could look down on the world. But when it came to mobilizing troops and giving advice, even though she had received a lot of advice from Emo Xiuyao, she still could not help but feel a little weak at the beginning. Chapter 312. Feng Zhiyao said, I'm sure that West Hill sent at least 600,000 soldiers this time. With so many soldiers and the reputation of West Hill Genom of Gojoseon as the god of war, not to mention you, Princess Consort. Even those veterans on the battlefield are worried. Although Westhill Genom of Gojoseon had been defeated by Mo Lufang, the Prince Regent of Dechu State, Mo Lufang was dead and he was still alive. Li, you did well. Su Qingze looked at Yi Li and said lightly. His usually cold eyes were filled with a touch of warmth. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Second brother, don't praise me. I may look calm on the surface, but my heart is in a mess." Su Qingze said, "Don't be too nervous. Just do what you can. If there's anything you want me to do, just ask." Yi Li nodded, "Thank you, second brother." At this time Mo Xiaoyao, who was far away in the northern tribes, felt cold in his heart. Looking up at the bright moon in the sky, he couldn't help but think of the past year. Since the accident, he had never thought that his life would be so comfortable and happy. At first, they were like family and friends, then they helped each other hand in hand, and then they were deeply attached to each other. He didn't know when, but Li's every frown and smile had been engraved in his heart, and it would be difficult to remove in this life. "Prince." A shadow guard quietly appeared behind him. "What's the news?" The shadow guard said, "The list of the people behind the assassination of Princess Consort has been investigated. And since Westhill's invasion, the Emperor has summoned Princess Consort to the palace several times. It seems that he wants to take the military power of the Mahist army from Princess Consort. But he hasn't succeeded." Mo Xiaoyao's eyes were dark. He sneered and said, "He can never tell what's important and what's urgent. Go and tell Ronghua that no matter what, we must leave tomorrow." The shadow guard hesitated for a moment and said, "I'm afraid that Princess Ronghua does not have such a deep influence on Yeluhong." Mo Xiaoyao said nonchalantly, "If Yeluhong wants to defeat Yeluyi, he naturally knows what to do. Go and prepare. We'll set off tomorrow." The shadow guard nodded, this subordinate obeys. Dismissing the guards, Mo Xiaoyao raised his head to look at the bright moon in the sky, his gaze gradually becoming gentle. Li. Xiaoyao always makes you suffer. One day, I will deliver the best in the world to you. As for those who want to hurt you, I will never let them off." Originally, Mo Xiaoyao should have returned to the capital the moment he heard the news of Westhill's invasion. However, the king of the northern tribe's attitude was unusually firm. He insisted that Mo Xiaoyao stay and attend the crown prince's wedding. He even faintly threatened him. Mo Xiaoyao was not afraid of his threats. However, if he really left on the spot, the Dechu state would very likely have to face the attack of two countries at the same time. The king of the northern tribes was not ready to annex the Dechu state yet. However, he did not mind at all delaying Mo Xiaoyao, the young god of war, for a period of time for Westhill. Perhaps he could even gain some benefits from it. Therefore, he also deserved to die. 10 li outside of Xinyang City, Westhill's hundreds of thousands of soldiers and horses were eyeing the city not far away. That city was more attractive and meaningful than a mere border city. There were countless provisions and military supplies. It was the richest and most prosperous city in the northwest. That city would become their first real step in conquering the Dechu state. In the commander-in-chief's tent, Genom of Gojoseon, who was almost 50 years old, was sitting behind a desk. He held the memorial that his subordinate had just sent to him with one hand and looked at it for a while. Suddenly, he laughed wildly. The generals below looked at each other in dismay. They did not know what had made the prince so happy. When he had finished laughing, he said loudly, "Mo Lufang. You also have a day like this. If you were to see your Ding royal estate in this state, would you regret it?" The generals all exchanged glances. The person standing at the front stepped forward and asked, "Prince, is there any good news?" Genom of Gojoseon casually handed over the memorial and said to everyone with a smile, "The Ding royal estate really does not have a successor. A woman is actually in charge of military power." The general who saw the memorial had a strange expression on his face. He said, "Deputy Marquis Nanho, the Ding royal consort is supervising the army? What does Dong Chu mean by this?" Genom of Gojoseon lightly snorted and said, "We have no choice. I have also heard of Marquis Nanho. He has always been neutral and does not concern himself with worldly affairs. It's fine if he is a talented general. However, he does not have the ability to lead the Mahist army. Moreover, the military power of the Mahist army is not that easy to obtain. Could it be that the Mahist army is currently in the hands of the Ding royal consort? The general said in shock. Genom of Gojosian nodded and smiled thoughtfully. That's right. Mo Xiaoyao is far away in the northern tribes and cannot rush back. Without Mo Xiaoyao, the Ding royal estate does not have anyone who can lead the army. Now, the military power has fallen into the hands of a 16 or 17-year-old girl. The generals below the tent could not help but become excited. They all whispered to each other for a while. Someone stepped forward and said, "Since it is like this, Prince, we can take this opportunity to take care of the Mahist army. This will prevent them from reuniting with Prince Ding and causing trouble for our expedition to Eastern Chu." Genom of Gojosian slightly narrowed his eyes. His right hand carelessly stroked his empty left sleeve as he said, "Although I want to fight with Mo Xiaoyao, but, as a general, we must not fight based on personal feelings. This time, it is indeed the best opportunity that the heavens have given us. If we can destroy this army, the Ding royal estate will not be able to achieve anything. We will listen to Prince's orders." Everyone said in unison. The idea of destroying the Ding royal estate made everyone's hearts become faintly excited. Genom of Gojosian nodded in satisfaction. "Very good. Speed up the attack on Xinyang. We must take Xinyang city within 3 days. Then head to Jiangxia and wipe out the Mahist army in one fell swoop." "As you command." Reporting to Wang Fei, a letter has arrived on the second day. In the Mahist army's barracks, Yi Li was sitting in a large tent. She was discussing matters with Marquis Nan and the others while the entire army was stationed. Zhuo Jing came in holding a letter. Yi Li did not even raise her head as she lightly said, "Translate it for me." Zhuo Jing nodded and walked to the desk in the corner of the tent to translate the letter. Yi Li continued to speak to Marquis Nan. "It will take at least 7 days for us to reach Jiangxia. I'm afraid that it will be difficult to speed up the army as Marquis Nan said." Marquis Nan frowned and said, "Why is that? The Mahist army has always moved quickly. I remember that at their fastest, they could travel hundreds of li in a day." Yi Li shook her head and said, "Marquis Nan, that was a small army. We have an army of nearly 300,000. The journey that should have taken 10 days has been shortened to 5 days. Do you think that even if we really reach the border, these 300,000 soldiers will still have the strength to fight? I'm afraid that the West Hill people will not give us time to rest. Once we reach Jiangxia, what awaits us will only be a fierce battle." Marquis Nan sighed heavily. "How could I not know what Wang Fei is talking about? It's just that I am really worried about Xinyang." Yi Li shook her head and said in a low voice, "Xinyang cannot be protected. With Marquis Nan's ability, how many days can you defend Xinyang against the Genom kingdom of Gojosian?" Marquis Nan thought for a moment and said, "Xinyang city does not lack military supplies. If it were me, I could defend it for a month." Yi Li said, "General Leng can defend it for half a month." "Marquis Nan, do you know how many days it has been today? Even if we grew wings, we would not be able to reach Xinyang in time. Furthermore, Xinyang city does not lack anything. Xinyang city lacks water." Chapter 313. Everyone's expression changed slightly. If they were short on food, they could barely survive for a few days. But if they were short on water, there was nothing much to say. Xinyang was located in the northwest and had a shortage of water. After being besieged by Xiling, it was almost certain that they would be short of water. "No matter how fast we go, Genom of Gojosian will definitely be waiting for us in Jiangxia." Yi Li sighed. Mu Yang frowned and asked, "What if Jiangxia is also breached?" Lu Jingxian raised his eyebrows and said, "Don't worry, Prince Mu. Although Jiangxia's defending General Yuan Pei, only has tens of thousands of troops, Jiangxia is completely different from Xinyang. It won't be a problem to defend for 10 days to half a month. Even if Genom of Gojoseon really has a large army, as long as Jiangxia has a single soldier, they won't let the Shilin people take half a step in. Hearing this, Marquis Nan and Mu Yang couldn't help but blush. The Mahist army had guarded the border for hundreds of years and had never let the enemy take a step into Dechu state. But now, because the emperor was afraid that the Prince Ding mansion had left the Mahist army idle, the Shilin army had already taken several cities and advanced 300 to 400 li in less than a month after the war started. Marquis Nan nodded and said, "It's good that Princess knows." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "I know that Marquis Nan is also worried about the war. Rest assured, Marquis Nan, General Sun Yen has already sent the Black Cloud cavalry to Jiangxia." Princess Zhuo Jing had already finished translating the letter and came over to deliver it to Yi Li. Yi Li lowered her head and read for a while. She frowned and handed the letter to Marquis Nan. "Marquis Nan, what do the generals think?" Marquis Nan glanced at it and was surprised to see Zhuo Jing standing beside Yi Li with a calm expression. He frowned and said, "Genom of Gojoseon suddenly increased the speed of their attack. Could it be that they want to take Jiangxia before we arrive?" "No. Princess Consort, I'm afraid something bad has happened." When Lu Jingxian and Feng Zhiyao saw Marquis Nan's expression change, they hurriedly took the letter and read it together. The more they read, the deeper their frowns became. Genom of Gojoseon sent people to attack Xinyang, but at the same time, he split up his troops to take a roundabout route. Even the South Army, which was not far from them, had sent a team to the north. "Princess." Feng Zhiyao frowned. Marquis Nan said in a low voice, "Genom of Gojoseon is attacking Xinyang fiercely while diverting troops to take a detour. I'm afraid he wants to cut off General Yuan's escape route." Yi Li frowned deeply. After a while, she said, "Bring me the map." At this time, the problem of not having a smooth flow of information was manifested. No matter what they analyzed now, they could not immediately pass it on to the generals at the front. They could only hope that the generals at the front also saw the other party's intentions and made the necessary response. Fortunately, this kind of problem was often mutual. Zhuo Jing turned around and took out a folded piece of paper from behind him. He slowly unfolded it. On the paper, there were winding lines marked with mountains and rivers. The border of Dechu State, from south to north, was clear at a glance. Yi Li picked up the pen on the table and marked out the routes of the Shilin troops mentioned in the letter. She frowned and raised her head to ask, "Has the detailed map of the northwest been sent back?" Zhuo Jing turned around and took out another one from his luggage. "It arrived this morning. I was just about to show it to Princess Consort." Yi Li cleared the table and spread out the map. She said, "What's the use of showing it to me? I've never been to the northwest. Marquis, General Lu, come and take a look." Everyone had been curious about the map in front of them for a long time. Hearing Yi Li's words, they immediately gathered around. There were two maps of about the same size on the table. One was clearly a map of all the border areas to the west of Dechu State. The other was much more detailed, but only the northwest. They had never seen it in detail before. Lu Jingxian praised, "Good stuff. This general has been at the northwest border since I was 20 years old. Even after 20 years, I don't dare say I know more than this map." Marquis Nan nodded and pointed at a place on the map. "General Lu is right. This marquis has been to the northwest a few times in the past. Princess Consort's map is very detailed." Yi Li smiled in satisfaction. How could it not be detailed? This group of people who had just been trained had all been sent out. Adding on the original maps, if they were still not familiar with the northwest, then they had learned for nothing. Yi Li stared at the two maps for a long time. She picked up the pen and drew a line on the map. She said in a deep voice, "Immediately send orders to the troops in the south. All troops near Shiling's southern army to gather in the west. Intercept the troops from the southern army." Zhuo Jing nodded in acknowledgement. Yi Li raised an eyebrow in thought and then smiled faintly. She lowered her head and took out a piece of paper. She wrote a line of characters on the paper and handed it to Zhuo Jing. She asked, "Where is Qin Feng?" Zhuo Jing lowered his head and thought for a while. He said, "Near the Ling Pass. He should be preparing to come up north to meet with us." Yili lowered her head to look at the location of the Ling Pass. She said, "Tell him not to come back. Give this to him." The next step of the plan. Zhuo Jing put away the paper and walked out without looking at it. "Does Princess Consort have a plan?" Mu Yang asked with raised eyebrows. Yili smiled faintly. "It can't be considered a plan. I'm just making some arrangements in advance. Just in case." Knowing that she had no intention of explaining, Mu Yang only looked at her with a complicated gaze and did not pursue the matter. The Mahist army had listened to the orders of the Ding King for 100 years. In recent years, they did not have a good impression of the emperor. As someone who was sent here by the emperor, his status was naturally awkward. Fortunately, Mu Yang was also a very tactful person. Marquis Nan looked at Yi Li and then at Mu Yang as if he did not notice the undercurrent between the two of them. He stroked his beard and said with a smile, "It's good that Princess Consort has a plan. We're hundreds of miles away now, so there's nothing we can do. It's better to rush to the battlefield to provide support as soon as possible." Yi Li and Mu Yang both nodded in agreement. Only then did Marquis Nan smile and discuss with Yi Li and the others for a while before getting up to leave and return to his tent to rest. After Marquis Nan left, Mu Yang had no choice but to get up and leave even if he wanted to stay and continue listening to everyone's reply. Xinyang City. On the city wall, Leng Qingyu looked at the billowing flags in the distance with a dark expression. Xinyang had been surrounded by the army for more than 10 days. If they still could not get out of the siege, even if the Xiling army did not break through, it would soon collapse from the inside. In addition, more than half of the reinforcements who had just arrived at the border had been injured. As the deputy general, Marquis Nan's heir had gone missing on the battlefield, which made the morale of the soldiers guarding the city even lower. If the general of Xinyang City had not died in battle and there was no one to preside over the overall situation, it was unknown whether he would still be standing on the city wall. "General Leng, when will the reinforcements from the imperial court arrive?" A tired-looking general hurried over and asked Leng Qingyu rudely. These soldiers were originally very dissatisfied with this general who had become the commander-in-chief of an army at such a young age. Moreover, he had been beaten into a sorry state by Shiling's Genom of Gojoseon before arriving, which made them look down on him even more. Moreover, he was the son of the Defender General of the state and was personally conferred the title of Great General by the Emperor. After the general of Xinyang City died in battle, he was the highest commander in Xinyang City. Although everyone was respectful on the surface, no one knew what they were thinking. As for the high-ranking generals of Xinyang City, they did not even bother to put on an act. A trace of embarrassment and anger flashed across Leng Qingyu's cold face. His life had been smooth since he was young and he became the commander of the Imperial Guards with his own ability. He was one of the top young talents in the Chu capital. However, he kept running into a wall. His originally confident heart couldn't help but become hesitant and doubtful. Chapter 314. Frowning, Leng Qingyu said, "They will naturally arrive when it's time. Just wait patiently, General." The man's face darkened. "This general can wait, but Suncreed City can't. General Leng, look at the city below and inside. How many more days do you think Suncreed City can hold on?" "Shut up!" Leng Qingyu roared, his gaze shooting at the person in front of him like an arrow. He said coldly, "Suncreed City won't fall." That person was startled by the murderous look in his eyes. He turned around and snorted, "Since General Leng has such confidence, this general will wait and see." After saying that, he flicked his sleeves and turned around to leave quickly. Seeing the other party leave without hesitation, Leng Qingyu's gaze became even more malicious. But when he turned back to look at the endless enemy army in the distance, he could only forcibly suppress them. Suddenly, the sound of drums below the city shook the heavens. Leng Qingyu looked into the distance in shock. The originally motionless banners began to move. Taking a deep breath, Ling Qingyu raised his voice and said, "Defend the city." Once again, the two armies engaged in a fierce battle above and below the city walls. On the other hand, the defenders were clearly showing signs of exhaustion and weakness, which made the soldiers below the city even more excited as they charged forward. In a certain tall building in Suncreed City, deafening battle cries could be heard from the city gates outside the slanted window. Inside the window, an ordinary-looking man said in a low voice, "Suncreed City can't be defended anymore. Get ready. We're withdrawing." Another man frowned. "Should we ask General Yuan to support them from the outside? The princess consort and the reinforcements are already halfway there." The man shook his head. "It's useless. Haven't you noticed that the Xiling army's attacks have been much fiercer these past 2 days? Genom of Gojoseon is probably going to take Suncreed City at all costs. Ling Qingyu can't suppress the soldiers of Suncreed City. Even if General Yuan has been harassing them from the outside, he won't be able to delay them for long. It's very likely that General Yuan and the others will be trapped as well. All right. Immediately send a message to ask General Yuan to leave the battlefield and return to Jiangxia. You guys go first. I'll stay behind to handle matters in Suncreed City." "All right. Be careful." After sending off his companion, the man turned and went downstairs to the official's residence of Suncreed City. In the West Hill military camp, Genom of Gojoseon sat in a comfortable chair with a calm expression on his face. He supported his chin with one hand and closed his eyes to rest while waiting for news from outside. There would definitely be news of Suncreed City's fall by today. Although that kid in Suncreed City had some ability, he was still too inexperienced. Under such circumstances, he would be powerless to turn the tide. As soon as he thought of the countless grains, cloth, gold, and silver in Suncreed City becoming the resources he would use to attack the Dechu state in the future, his mood couldn't be described with words. How are the preparations on Yuan Pei's side? Remembering something, Genom of Gojoseon opened his eyes and asked. The high-ranking officer who was also sitting down and waiting for the news immediately stood up and said, "Following Prince's instructions, our army has already secretly planned a way to return to Jiangxia. Although we can't find Yuan Pei's men for the time being, once Xinyang falls, he will inevitably return to Jiangxia. At that time, we won't have to worry about not being able to catch him." Genom of Gojoseon nodded in satisfaction. "Very good." Outside the tent, the sound of a retreat was heard. Genom of Gojoseon's smile deepened. He stood up and said with a smile, "Xinyang has fallen." All the high-ranking officers' faces were filled with joy. "Congratulations, Prince." Genom of Gojoseon shook his head. "No, congratulations to all of us. With Xinyang, we will be invincible in our attack on the Dechu state. This time, the heavens are indeed protecting Xiling." All the high-ranking officers chanted in unison, "The heavens are protecting Xiling." Outside the tent, the hurried footsteps of a messenger soldier could be heard. "Reporting to Prince, Suncreed City has fallen." "Very good. What about the kid guarding the city?" Genom of Gojoseon asked. The messenger soldier hesitated for a moment before saying, "We haven't found Xinyang's commanding general, Ling Qingyu." Hearing this, Genom of Gojoseon couldn't help but frown. He waved his hand and said, "Go investigate again. Immediately send back any news." "Yes." 2 hours later, the soldiers who had gone to attack the city had all returned to camp. The tent was filled with jubilation. Only Genom of Gojoseon frowned. Seeing this, his subordinates couldn't help but ask, "Prince, is there something wrong?" Genom of Gojoseon shook his head. "I don't know. I keep feeling that something isn't right. Reporting to Prince, something bad has happened." Outside the tent, someone loudly requested an audience. Genom of Gojoseon's heart sank. He said coldly, "Come in." "What happened to Suncreed City?" The person said, "Reporting to Prince, there should have been less than 20% of the provisions in Suncreed City." What? Everyone was shocked. Could it be that the East Chu people knew that they would lose and moved the provisions in advance? Impossible. After Sun Creed was surrounded, even a mosquito couldn't fly out, let alone so much provisions. Genom of Gojosian's face was gloomy. He asked in a low voice, "Is there anything else?" The soldier looked at Genom of Gojosian's expression and said in a trembling voice, "There's also the silver in Sun Creed City's treasury. The silver and banknotes from several banks have all disappeared. Sun Creed City has less than 30% of the original amount of silver." The tent was silent. All the generals peeked at Genom of Gojosian's expression. No one dared to speak. Sun Creed City wasn't the richest city in Eastern Chu, but it was the place where the Chu state stored the most military supplies. It was also one of the top 5 commercial cities in the Chu state, even though their trading partner was Xiling. Originally, everyone was drooling over this city because of the countless provisions, gold, and silver. But now, there was nothing left. Good. After a long time, Genom of Gojosian suddenly laughed coldly. What a good Ding Palace! Everyone was stunned. Someone asked suspiciously, "Prince, you're saying it was done by the Ding Palace?" Genom of Gojosian smiled and said, "Other than the Ding Palace, who else could hide all the provisions so quickly without anyone noticing? But, isn't Prince Ding in the northern tribes? That means there's another expert in the Ding Palace." Reporting to Prince, General Zheng just gave the order to massacre the city. A soldier hurried to the door and reported. "Bastard!" Genom of Gojosian slammed the table and stood up. He said in a stern voice, "Who gave the order?" The soldier trembled in fear and quickly said, "General Zheng." General Zheng brought people to a pawn shop to get something and had a conflict with the citizens. Then General Zheng gave the order to massacre the city, immediately passed down I's order to stop the massacre. If anyone dares to violate it, execute them on the spot. Order Zheng Bian to come see I immediately. Yes. In the large tent, the soldiers looked at each other in dismay. "Prince, it's fine to kill those Eastern Chu people. Leaving so many people is a waste of food." "That's right, Prince. Sun Creed City has fallen and we haven't gained anything. We might as well kill those Eastern Chu people and show them what we're made of." "Stupid." Genom of Gojosian coldly said, "How many people does Eastern Chu have? Can you kill them all? Right now, only the Eastern Chu army will resist us. Once the Eastern Chu citizens know about the massacre, all of them will resist us." Chapter 315. Many people did not care. Eastern Chu's army can't do anything to us. What can a few commoners do? Genom of Gojosian said in a deep voice, "In short, without I's orders, you are not allowed to kill Eastern Chu's commoners." Reporting to Prince, Yuan Pei led tens of thousands of Mahist army to break out of the encirclement and head towards Jiangxia. Hearing this, Genom of Gojosian frowned. What happened? The troops that the heir sent to stop Yuan Pei were ambushed and completely wiped out. Moreover, Yuan Pei seems to be very clear about our army's layout and terrain. He led his troops to split up and pass through our army's gaps. Although he lost some troops, the Mahist army's main force did not suffer too much damage. Reporting to Prince, we just received news from the Southern Army. 3 days ago, the heir was ambushed and the heir was seriously injured. Genom of Gojosian suddenly stood up. "How is Tingfeng?" "The heir is no longer in danger, but his injuries are quite serious. I'm afraid he won't be able to lead troops in a short period of time." Genom of Gojosian lowered his head and pondered for a long time. He slowly suppressed the anger in his heart and waved his hand. "I understand. You may leave first." The originally joyous atmosphere in the large tent became gloomy because of the successive news. After a long time, Genom of Gojosian laughed softly. "Good, the Ding Palace is indeed filled with experts. In this battle, I did not win. Prince? Forget it. Send someone to tell Tingfeng that I will send someone else to take over the Southern Army. Tell him to come to Xinyang as soon as possible." Genom of Gojosian waved his hand and calmly said, no matter what, Xinyang is already ours. Let him take charge of the situation. I don't believe that those provisions and gold and silver can fly away. They must still be in the city. Yes. On the road after the heavy rain, Yili rode at the front of the army, but her beautiful brows were tightly knitted and she did not speak. Nan Ho and the others were by her side. Seeing her so curious, they asked, "What's wrong, princess?" Yili shook her head and said, "Nothing, I'm just worried about the situation in Xinyang." Nan Ho raised his eyebrows in confusion. Xinyang's fall was already a foregone conclusion, what was there to worry about? Yili frowned and looked at the roadside. Because they were not on the official road, there was a steady stream of people fleeing from the northwest. Yili had mixed feelings as she looked at the sorry state of the commoners with their families. In truth, the reason why the war was so one-sided was mostly because of the infighting in the imperial court. If they had been prepared and sent reinforcements in time, this would not have happened. In any era, the ones who would suffer the most from the flames of war would always be the common people. Yili vaguely remembered a sentence that her teacher had taught her in her previous life: prosperity, the common people suffer. Death, the people suffer. Wang Fei. Zhuo Jing urged his horse to catch up from behind. He rode half a horse's length behind Yili and spoke in a low voice. Yili pulled on the reins slightly and slowed down. She tilted her head to look at Zhuo Jing. Zhuo Jing said in a low voice, "I just received news that Xinyang has fallen." Yili nodded, her expression as usual. The fall of Xinyang was within everyone's expectations. After a moment of silence, she asked, "How is General Yuan?" "General Yuan has already brought his men back to Jiangxia." "But..." Zhuo Jing hesitated for a moment. "I just received news. The Xiling army has slaughtered Xinyang city." "What?" Yili's expression darkened. Her originally gentle features were instantly dyed with a layer of murderous frost. Nan Ho, who was closest to them, clearly heard Zhuo Jing's words. The reins in his hand shook and he quickly steadied himself. He only stared fixedly at Zhuo Jing without speaking. Zhuo Jing said in a low voice, "After the Xiling army entered the city, they clashed with the common people. Afterwards, the general who led the attack, Zheng Bian, gave the order to slaughter Xinyang." What did Xiling's Genom of Gojosian mean? Genom of Gojosian did not go to the front lines. By the time he gave the order to stop it, it was already too late. At least 2/3 of the common people in Xinyang died an unnatural death. Zhuo Jing's voice was slightly hoarse. Since the founding of Dechu State, this was the first time that a city had been slaughtered. Many of the soldiers could not accept this. Yili laughed coldly. She pulled on the reins and galloped forward. Nan Ho paused and looked at Zhuo Jing with some confusion. Zhuo Jing hesitated for a moment before following. Yili did not go far. She stopped at the side of the road and silently watched the fleeing common people pass by. Zhuo Jing said in a low voice, "Wang Fei." Yili turned to look at him. She played with the horsewhip in one hand as she said, "Someone once told me that letting the common people personally experience war is a disgrace to the soldiers and the country." Zhuo Jing advised, "This is not Wang Fei's fault." Yili shook her head and laughed coldly, "Zheng Bian, is it? His head will be at the king's manor. I want his head as a sacrifice to the souls of the people of Xinyang city. This subordinate understands. I guarantee that within 10 days, Zheng Bian's head will be hung on the walls of Xinyang city." 7 days later, when Genom of Gojosian's army had reached Jiangxia, Lei Tingfeng, who had stayed behind in Xinyang, sent someone to deliver a secret letter. Zheng Bian, who had also stayed in Xinyang city, had been killed in his own room. His head was hung on the walls of Xinyang city. Next to the head was a flying dragon and phoenix character. It clearly stated that the murderer was from the king's manor. After receiving Lei Tingfeng's secret letter, Genom of Gojosian's face was as calm as water. After thinking for a while, he replied to Lei Tingfeng and ordered the attack on Jiangxia to be stepped up. Jiangxia was a small city less than 200 li away from Xinyang. The city was less than a third the size of Xinyang City and was surrounded by mountains on three sides. However, Shiling's military strength was equivalent to the sum of all the cities they had conquered in the past. The Shiling army, which had been unstoppable and seemingly invincible, finally witnessed the true strength of the Dechu state's army in front of this small city. Genom of Gojoseon, who had not personally participated in the attack on a large city like Xinyang, personally stood behind the army this time. He stood on the hill and watched with his own eyes as the soldiers of the two armies fought endlessly below the city. He watched as the black-clothed soldiers on the city walls continuously beat down the enemies who tried to climb up the city walls as if they never knew fatigue. "Prince, I didn't expect a small city of 50,000 people to be so difficult to deal with. Shouldn't we think of something?" The general standing behind him asked in a low voice. He looked at the black-clothed figures on the city walls with eyes full of frustration and shadow. This was a mark that the Mahist army had used countless blood and lives to deeply engrave in the hearts of their enemies over the past 100 years. Genom of Gojoseon sighed softly and said, "Fortunately, the emperor of the Dechu state does not trust the king's manner very much." The generals behind him did not ask why, because they were also rejoicing. If the ruler and his subjects of the Dechu state knew each other and trusted each other, why would they worry about the world being unjust? Day and night, step up the attack. We must take Jiangxia before the reinforcements from the Prince Ding mansion arrive. Genom of Gojoseon said sternly. This general obeys. On the city walls in the distance, the gray-haired old General Yuan Pei stared at the enemy troops below the city walls, who seemed to never retreat. His brows were deeply furrowed. His eyes, which had seen through the world, were bloodshot and tired, but his back was straight. His eyes, which stared at the city walls, were filled with the determination to live and die with Jiangxia. Chapter 316. General Yuan. Leng Qingyu hurried over. It had been less than a month since the expedition, but Leng Qingyu's arrogant and indifferent young face was full of vicissitudes and frustration. Yuan Pei looked at him and shook his head. He sighed softly. "General Leng, what's the matter?" Leng Qingyu glanced at the place where the banners were fluttering in the distance and frowned. "General Yuan, I'm afraid it'll be too much of a blow to the morale of the soldiers if we don't come out." Yuan Pei said, "General Leng, don't worry. The morale of the Mahist army will not be suppressed just because of these few days. Everyone knows that our army doesn't have the strength to fight against Shiling at all. The only thing we can do now is to defend and wait for reinforcements." Leng Qingyu glanced at the soldiers on the city wall, and his eyes darkened. Yuan Pei was right. What was really hit was not the morale of the Mahist army, but the morale of the less than 10,000 soldiers he had brought out of Xinyang City. After this great defeat, these remnants of the defeated army had long since collapsed. In the past few days, the West Hills soldiers had been attacking non-stop, making them even more frightened. If this continued, there would be trouble before Jiangxia was broken. This is a battlefield. My mission is to protect Jiangxia. General Leng, a momentary dispute won't bring any benefits to the current situation. The Shiling soldiers are not useless. Once tens of thousands of us enter an army of hundreds of thousands, it'll be no different from water entering the sea. We can only be swallowed by them, Yuan Pei said earnestly. Leng Qingyu was silent. It was not that he didn't understand what Yuan Pei said, but he really couldn't bear the current predicament. It was the first time in his life that he had led an army and ended up like this. In fact, the outcome of this war had little to do with him. It could be foreseen that even if what awaited him in the near future was not the emperor's punishment, it would be a lifetime of idleness. He would never have the chance to lead an army again. Besieging the city, defending the city. The soldiers on both sides fought tirelessly day and night. Corpses piled up under the city wall and blood flowed like a river. The corpses of their own people and the corpses of their enemies could no longer be distinguished. Everyone seemed to be fighting by instinct. However, Jiangxia's military strength was only 50,000, and this included the number of people who had died in the battle to support Xinyang. In reality, there were less than 40,000 people. Even if the remnants of the defeated soldiers who had retreated from Xinyang were included, there were less than 50,000 people. Their enemy, on the other hand, had over 200,000 elite soldiers. These soldiers were trained by Genom of Gojoseon over the past 10 years, and they were the best of the best. The number of soldiers guarding the city of Jiangxia was decreasing. Every time, it seemed like the city gate would be breached in the next moment. However, as time passed, the flags hanging on the city gate tower still belonged to the Dechu state and the Mahist army. Behind the Xiling army, Genom of Gojoseon stared solemnly at the tightly shut city gate in the distance. "Prince, they can't hold on any longer." Genom of Gojoseon did not say anything, but his eyes were filled with respect for his enemy. It had been 5 days and 24 hours of continuous fierce attacks. There were only tens of thousands of people. Even he himself might not be able to guarantee that he could hold on until now. This was not something that could be done with wisdom and ability. The entire army must also have unparalleled faith and determination. After a long while, Genom of Gojoseon said in a deep voice, "Continue. Take down Jiangxia in 2 hours." More than 2 hours later, the city gate of Jiangxia finally fell heavily and slowly. On the city gate tower, Yuan Pei, who was covered in blood, casually threw away his battle robe and glanced at the soldiers on the city gate tower. He said sternly, "Kill." All the soldiers' eyes were red. It was a disgrace for the city guarded by the Mahist army to be trampled by the enemy. They must use the enemy's blood to wash away this shame. All the soldiers desperately pounced on the enemy closest to them. On the city gate tower, at the city gate, and on the streets, killing was everywhere. Ling Qingyu stood at the corner of the street, watching the killing in front of him. His eyes were so red that it seemed like blood would drip out. Behind him was a group of defeated soldiers. They could no longer fight after escaping from Xinyang, and no one asked them to pick up their weapons again. Ling Qingyu looked back at them and said in a deep voice, "Do you see? They are the same as you, soldiers of Dechu state. The city was also breached. What did they do? What did we do? It's my incompetence that I couldn't defend Xinyang. You're on your own." With that, he pulled out his sword and rushed out. The remaining soldiers looked at each other. After a long time, one of them rushed out with a knife in his hand. Then another, and another. A group of soldiers completely different from the Black Mahist army rushed out from the corner of the street and pounced on the enemy troops pouring in from the city gate. The Wiling soldiers were blocked from entering the city, which aroused the bestial nature in their hearts. They howled and pounced on every soldier of Dechu state. In an instant, blood spurted out and covered the streets. Rumble, an earth-shattering sound came from afar. Everyone couldn't help but be stunned. The surviving Mahist army soldiers were ecstatic and angry. Black Cloud Cavalry. The Black Cloud Cavalry is here. Reinforcements are here. On the wide street, a black mass of people rushed over with great momentum and ferocious killing intent. The leader, a man in red, galloped over on his horse. His clear voice was full of murderous intent. "Block the city gate. Don't let any of the soldiers who entered the city out. Left and right wings, go up the city wall." "Yes." The Black Army emerged from the end of the street like a tide and quickly pounced on the people fighting on the street and at the city gate. The city gate that had collapsed a quarter of an hour ago was quickly closed again. The Wiling soldiers who rushed into Jiangxia City in order to snatch military merits were horrified to find that they had become turtles in a jar, trapped beasts in a cage. The soldiers in black methodically rushed to where they needed to go. Countless people in black suddenly appeared on the city wall that had been filled with the gray figures of the Wiling soldiers. The killing resumed. In the distance, Genom of Gojoseon saw the sudden appearance of the soldiers in black on the city wall. His expression changed. Then he saw a flamboyant figure in red appear on the city wall. His body was like an invincible dragon. "Prince, that is Feng Xiao. The people of the Chu capital call him Third Young Master Feng. He is the son of a concubine of the richest man in the Chu capital. He was expelled from his family when he was young. He followed Imo Xiaoyao on the battlefield in his teens. He is Mo Xiaoyao's most trusted aide. His appearance here must mean that the Mahist army's reinforcements have arrived. Genom of Gojoseon's expression was gloomy. He said in a low voice, "Continue the attack." The war drums shook the sky. The gray figures and the black figures fought fiercely. But the gate of Jiangxia City was never pushed open again. When countless archers in black appeared on the city wall and arrows rained down on the people below the city wall, a snow-white slender figure calmly walked up the city wall. Standing beside her were South Marquis Muyang and Zhuo Jing. It was obviously a bloody storm, but the snow-white robe was unexpectedly not stained with any blood. The spotless white robe gave people a kind of inexplicable coldness and sternness. Yi Li stood on the city wall and looked at the commander flag of the Xiling army behind the enemy in the distance. Even if she could not see the other person's face, she could still feel the majestic momentum and exposed anger on the other side. Her lips slightly curved into a sneer. She ordered in a cold voice, "Don't leave any of the Wiling soldiers in Jiangxia City. Throw all the corpses out of the city."